Chapter 801. Wei Wei Bai absent-mindedly finished dealing with her mother, who was also the Bai family's matriarch, as well as a bunch of older brothers and sisters. She asked the system, "Where's Chi Chimo?" System, "Dead." Wei Wei Bai, system, "The weather is cold." After being watered and just coming back from rebirth, his body was weak, so he directly fell down. He's probably running a fever now. Wei Wei Bai's eyes lit up. The fever was good. She liked to make targets miserable the most. Once they were miserable, she would take the opportunity to redeem them. Favorable impression points would come very quickly. Wei Wei Bai hurriedly said, "Go go go, quickly go take care of him." System, collapsing character setting. Wei Wei Bai's footsteps paused. This was a problem. After all, if her personality suddenly changed, Chi Chimu would definitely be vigilant. The consequence of not trusting him was that no matter how good she was to him, the favorability wouldn't rise. Bai Weiwei walked around expressionlessly, all kinds of conspiracies and overt schemes running through her mind. She had to find a normal reason to get close to Chi Chimu. It began to snow outside. Chi Chimu lived in a simple and crude room similar to a firewood shed. He only had time to change his clothes before his entire body collapsed. It was the same in his previous life. When he was pranked, he hovered on the edge of life and death many times. That was why his body later became weak. That was why that poison could easily take his life. Thinking of this, he really hated the Bai family to the bone. Chi Chimu's thin lips were white, his expression haggard, but his pair of black eyes were frighteningly bright. There was no fear or anxiety, but calmness. Everything he had now was in the hands of the Bai family. Even his qualifications for the imperial examinations were obtained after he first met the third prince. And the most important reason for being able to rely on the third prince was because of the wealth his parents left him. Chi Chimu only found out in his previous life by chance that his parents were famous wealthy merchants. The Chi family was very rich. But later on, the two of them died in an accident, and he was brought to live in the Bai family. And the Chi family's wealth fell into the hands of the Bai family. Later on, he discovered that the Chi family was much wealthier than he had imagined. The Bai family had only taken a small portion of it. As for the place where the wealth was stored, he had seen the map in the hairpin in his previous life. And in this life he needed to obtain this wealth again. What he needed was the hairpin his mother had given him. He remembered that hairpin, it was in Wei Wei Bai's hands. Only with this amount of money could he rely on the third prince, who had successfully usurped the throne in his previous life. Because the current third prince was still being suppressed by the crown prince. He only had ambition and wisdom, but he lacked talent and wealth. Because of his fever, Chi Chimu couldn't sleep and thought about many things. The more he thought about it, the more he hated the Bai family. Suddenly, the sound of frolicking came from outside. "Where's that little bastard? I heard that Big Sister punished him. He must have made Big Sister unhappy." He was Wei Wei Bai's younger brother. The mistress of the Bai family only gave birth to a pair of twins, Bai Qi and Wei Wei Bai. After Bai Qi's death, in the entire Bai family, only Wei Wei Bai, the daughter of the first wife, had the highest and most respected position. Her group of younger brothers and sisters were all born of concubines, and all of them thought of ways to curry favor with Wei Wei Bai. And bullying him was the best way to curry favor. Chi Chimu's fingers clenched tightly, his eyes ruthless and oppressive. The crumbling door was pushed open and a few sloppy teenagers walked in. Seeing Chi Chimu lying sickly on the broken wooden bed, they immediately kicked the bed. "Still not coming over to kneel in front of us? You dare to sleep after seeing us? Your guts are quite big." Chapter 802. The other immediately reached out and pulled the thin and feverish Chi Chimu off the bed. Because Chi Chimu's body was too weak, his head was dizzy, and he fell to the cold ground without any strength to resist. For a moment his chest and lungs felt stuffy and he coughed. The malicious ridicule of the youths was ear-piercing. "Say, is his illness contagious? Such a sick ghost, why don't you drive him out of the manor? Our Bai family is a scholarly family. Even if he is a little bastard with a vicious heart, it is because of our benevolent hearts that we can accommodate him." Benevolent hearts. A trace of ridicule flashed through Chi Chimu's eyes. He was truly disgusted with the Bai family. The youth who kicked the door suddenly took out a bag. "Do you know what this is? It is good stuff to nourish the body. I also have a good heart. Hearing that you are sick to death, I brought it to nourish you." Chi Chimu saw the thing in his hand and his pupils shrank. It was the same in his previous life. When he fell ill, he was stuffed with tiger and wolf medicine. It caused his body to directly collapse. Chi Chimu knew that he couldn't let this happen again. If he hadn't just been reborn last night, there would be no time to plan. He wouldn't be as passive as he was now. The youth revealed a malicious smile and took out the medicinal powder, about to stuff it into Chi-Chimu's mouth. Chi-Chimu reached out and viciously swatted. The youth's expression was sinister. He dodged and immediately gave him a kick. Who do you think you are, daring to kick this grandpa? You are just a little bastard without parents. Seeing that you are sick, I fed you medicine out of goodwill, but you actually repay kindness with enmity. Chi-Chimu's head was very dizzy. He choked and coughed up traces of blood. Several youths had already rushed forward, pressing down on his hands and feet, wanting to stuff the body-destroying medicine into Chi-Chimu's mouth. In any case, Chi-Chimu was a punching bag in the Bai family. They were used to bullying him even if they killed him. No one felt that there was anything wrong. Chi-Chimu's head felt like it was splitting and he almost couldn't breathe. He gritted his teeth, his eyes filled with blood. He remembered these people. The youths who were used to bullying him felt a chill run down their backs. One of them picked up a chair and was about to smash it down. He's still not letting go. I don't believe that he'll be able to bite his tongue after this hit. Chi-Chimu watched helplessly as the chair came crashing down. He clenched his fists so hard that they bled. But he couldn't avoid the chair. Just as the chair was about to fall down, a cry of surprise came from the door. The familiar voice caused the youths to be stunned. The chair stopped just above Chi-Chimu's head. Chi-Chimu took the opportunity to kick the youth in front of him away. Because he didn't have enough strength, the young man only took 2 steps back. Then, he fiercely turned around and said, "Are you looking for death? How dare you kick me?" At the door, Wei Bai frowned and looked at them with disdain. "That's enough. What are you all doing? Why are you all yelling about fighting and killing? Hurry up and leave." Wei Bai was the daughter of the first wife and the apple of the Bai family's eye. One word from her was worth 100 words from others. The youths immediately stopped, embarrassed. "Yes, sister." Then he immediately walked out. Once the group of youths had gone far away, Wei Bai looked at Chi-Chimu. His entire body had collapsed as he leaned against the bed. His thin, cold lips were tightly pursed, without a trace of blood. It was clearly the dead of winter, but his entire body was drenched in sweat. His face was abnormally flushed, and his brows were tightly furrowed as if he was enduring great pain. But even though he was already weak to this extent. Chapter 803. His eyes were still open, and under his thick, long eyelashes, a pair of eyes carried a ruthless, bloodthirsty aura. It made people feel a chill run down their backs. He looked at Wei Bai and blinked, the bloodthirst in his eyes disappearing. Then he slowly enunciated, "Why did Biaomei come? Is it because you saw that I didn't die and also came to feed me a dose of tiger and wolf medicine so that I can go on my way smoothly?" His words were soft and slow. There wasn't a trace of ruthlessness, but it was cold and gloomy. Wei Bai pulled out a handkerchief and covered her nose, looking around critically. "What is this? Why do you live in such a messy place?" Then she seemed to have spilled the beans and her expression changed. She quickly walked to Chi-Chimu's side, a bell at her waist, each step crisp and clear. Chi-Chimu looked at her coldly. After his rebirth, he also knew that he had to endure silently to succeed. Perhaps because of the burden of his body, his mind wasn't too clear. Seeing Wei Bai, new and old hatred rose up. He also lost the calm thought of acting to curry favor. Wei Bai revealed a forced smile. Her pale face and lips were extremely good, full and captivating with a moist luster. Even if it was a fake smile, it was extremely beautiful. Chi-Chimu became even more vigilant. He forced himself to hold on and stared at her. He didn't know what kind of vicious thoughts she had. But he saw her reach out with her soft, white fingers, holding the handkerchief, and approach him, gently wiping the sweat from his forehead. Her movements were gentle, and the young girl's orchid fragrance entered his nose with this movement. Chi-Chimu didn't dare to move, doubt flashing through his eyes. Wei Bai didn't wait for him to say anything. She had already turned around and instructed the maid outside to call for a doctor. Chi-Chimu looked at her with dark eyes. Wei Bai's smile didn't change. Seeing him like this, she said with false affection, "You are so ill, my heart hurts when I see you." Chi-Chimu? Then Wei Bai didn't care what Chi-Chimu thought. She had someone come in and carry Chi-Chimu back to the bed. Then Wei Bai turned her head and her expression changed. How can anyone live in such a messy house? There isn't even a charcoal stove. Are they trying to freeze people to death? The maids and manservants immediately tidied up. Wei Bai snorted coldly and couldn't help but cover her nose with her handkerchief. However, she thought of something and quickly moved the handkerchief away. His actions were filled with disdain. Chichimu, who was lying on the bed, felt relieved when he saw her actions. She wiped his forehead with the handkerchief. If she didn't mind, she would be possessed. The reborn Chichimu also began to revere ghosts and gods. What was Wei Wei Bai's motive? She was still as stupid as before, but she had deliberately come to treat him well? The room was tidied up and the doctor arrived. Chichimu had been tormented miserably enough. After being fed a bowl of medicine, his body finally recovered. Then he closed his eyes. He really couldn't take it anymore. Seeing that he had fallen asleep, Wei Wei Bai asked everyone to leave. Then she began to wipe his sweat and change the cold handkerchief. Her technique was clumsy, and as she wiped, she complained, "You can't die, do you hear me?" Chichimu was in a daze, feeling that Wei Wei Bai was always by his side. She was wiping his sweat? The doubts in Chichimu's heart grew stronger and stronger. In this world, Wei Wei Bai was the person who wished for him to die the most. Why would she specially come to take care of him? These thoughts blurred and he frowned in pain. Ice and fire intertwined in his body. She gently stroked his face with one hand. The temperature of the fingers was so gentle and warm. His eyes were dry. When he was extremely vulnerable, he was even more reluctant to part with that bit of warmth that didn't belong to him. // Chapter 804. Chichimu couldn't help but lean his face closer to that hand. The owner of the hand hesitated for a moment before not moving away. Chichimu's tightly furrowed brows softened. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 45. This sleep made Chichimu think that he was going to die again. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself still in this shabby room. He really had returned to the real world. He felt a hand on his neck, the fingertips touching his jaw, bringing about a tickling sensation. Chichimu was startled before turning his head. He saw Wei Wei Bai lying by the bed, her beautiful brows furrowed. Her white jade-like face didn't have the usual flamboyant and bright feeling, but had a trace of weakness that made people pity her. He stared at her, his gaze complicated and vigilant. If not for Wei Wei Bai's timely arrival, he might have been reborn and walked the same path as his previous life. His body would be completely worn down. Even without that cup of poison, his body wouldn't have lasted more than a few years. But today, she had interrupted his calamity of being fed the medicine and had specially come to take care of him? Chichimu felt that it was impossible for Wei Wei Bai to have discovered her conscience. So did she have a purpose? Wei Wei Bai slept uncomfortably. She seemed to feel Chichimu's gaze, her eyelashes trembling as she slowly opened her eyes. Her misty eyes carried the drunkenness of having just woken up, but they were clear and black, without the slightest hint of a vicious heart. Chichimu's eyes darkened and he looked away. Wei Wei Bai didn't react, and then she finally remembered something. Biaoga? This biaoga was like the melting of ice and blooming of flowers, sweet and soft spring water. It made Chichimu abruptly look over. Wei Wei Bai revealed a fake smile. Biaoga, are you feeling better? Chichimu's calm eyes trembled slightly. He pursed his lips for a long time before saying, I can't afford to be called Biaoga by you. Wei Wei Bai was originally in a bad mood. She suddenly stood up and put her hands on her hips. Do you think I want to call you Biaoga? If it weren't for... She quickly shut her mouth and glared at him. That flamboyant and bold spirit was back. This was the Wei Wei Bai he was familiar with. Bai Wei Wei immediately softened her temper and called out in a tender and soft voice, Biaoga, you and I are cousins. What else do you want me to call you? Can't you afford it? Chichimu looked deeply at her, and then after a moment of silence, he also revealed a smile. Cousin is right. Wei Wei Bai immediately let out a sigh of relief and said, I didn't treat you well in the past. Since I worked hard to take care of you today, just forget about it. Just forget about it. If it was just a light sentence. How could someone say something so stupid? The smile on Chichimu's lips was simply a smile of anger. Wei Wei Bai thought that his smile meant that he agreed, so she smiled as well. Her smile actually contained traces of innocence and tenderness. Chichimu felt that his mocking smile was for a blind person to see. He took a deep breath. I don't know why Biaoga has come to find me today. Wei Wei Bai, it's nothing. I just wanted to see you. After all, you and I grew up together and have deep feelings. Isn't it normal for me to visit you when you are sick? Deep feelings. It was deep hatred. Chichimu had always known that Wei Wei Bai's brain wasn't very good. Since childhood, she had been the only young master who didn't rush to flatter and coax her. In his previous life, he had only known her vicious appearance. But this stupidity, he only understood it so thoroughly today. Wei Wei Bai seemed to feel that with just a few words, the two's old grievances had been resolved. She quickly revealed a smile. "Cousin." Chi Chimu's mouth twitched. And Wei Wei Bai hesitated again. She wanted to say something but then paused. Then she sweetly called out, "Cousin?" Chi Chimu narrowed his eyes and remained calm. "And Biaoga, what did you call me for?" Wei Wei Bai hesitated for a moment. Just as she was about to speak, the maidservant outside the door suddenly said, "Miss, it's dark. We should go." Wei Wei Bai immediately jumped up like a rabbit that had rushed out of a cage. "Cow, come." It was as if being with Chi Chimu was the same as being in prison. Wei Wei Bai quickly said, "I'll come see you again tomorrow." With that she turned and left. Where was the slightest trace of deep feelings, not the slightest bit reluctant to leave. Chi Chimu stared deeply at her back, waiting until she had left. Only then did he discover that a handkerchief had been thrown on the ground. It was embroidered with peach blossoms. Was she so disgusted with the thing she had wiped for him? Chi Chimu's eyes were gloomy and cold. Then he didn't know what he was thinking, but he reached out to pick up the handkerchief and stuffed it into his sleeve. What was Wei Wei Bai trying to do? Why was she suddenly so good to him? Moreover, this kind of good was more like she was forced to do so. Full text // download. Chapter 805. Chi Chimu remained calm and collected. Regardless of the purpose, with a doctor and a charcoal stove, he could survive this calamity. The fact that his body hadn't collapsed was his greatest gain. The next day, Chi Chimu was able to get up and eat porridge. Warm food and medicine were delivered from the kitchen. He observed for a while, then picked up a silver needle and tested it bit by bit, fearing that there was something that shouldn't be there. Finding no problem, he began to eat slowly and gracefully. Before his rebirth, his body was cold and his spleen and stomach were out of whack, so eating too quickly would increase the burden on his body. This caused him to eat slowly. Chi Chimu was halfway through his meal when he heard the rustling of footsteps across the snow not far away. Then he heard the familiar soft voice of a young girl. "Why is this road so difficult to walk on? When the estate was building the road, did they not think of building it better?" The maid said, "This is a relatively remote place in the estate, so it is possible to forget." Chi Chimu heard this and indifferently lowered his head, using the spoon to unhurriedly stir the porridge in his bowl. Soon there was a knock on the door. There was actually someone who knew how to knock. Chi Chimu paused, not saying a word. Wei Wei Bai impatiently stomped her foot. "Just push the door open. It's so cold." Chi Chimu snorted, then restrained the cold light in his eyes, becoming indifferent. The door was pushed open and the cold wind outside blew in, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps. Chi Chimu subconsciously raised his eyes, only to see a young girl wearing a light-colored dress and a fox fur cloak. Her face was fair and tender, as beautiful as the snow outside the window. She saw him and called out in a clear voice, "Biaoga?" Chi Chimu also said softly, "Why did you come out in this cold weather?" Yesterday, his mind wasn't clear and his attitude towards her was too fierce. After all, they were still in the Bai estate and hadn't obtained the item. When it was time to endure, he should endure. There was no benefit in being too in the limelight. Wei Wei Bai took out a hand warmer from her sleeve and placed it on the table. Then she sat down in a chair and cupped her face as she looked at him. Then she smiled with a bit of a special charm. "I came to see if you're better." Chi Chimu became even more vigilant in his heart, but he didn't reveal the slightest bit of it on his face. "My cousin called for a doctor and prescribed some medicine. After drinking some medicine, I'm almost fully recovered." Wei Wei Bai's eyes drifted as if she was looking for something. Her tone was perfunctory. "That's good. You have to know that this is your home. If you need anything, just say the word." "Oh." Chi Chimu smiled darkly but didn't answer. Wei Wei Bai was also restless. Chi Chimu finally asked, "We're all family. If Biaomei wants me to do something, just say it directly." Wei Wei Bai hesitated. "Really?" Chi Chimu nodded, his smile gentle. "I will do my best to help you." Wei Wei Bai immediately stood up. "Then I'll come and see you tomorrow?" Chi Chimu. Then he saw Wei Wei Bai immediately turn around and leave. He still didn't have the slightest reluctance to leave. Chi Chimu silently looked at the open door. A cold wind blew in, carrying with it the scent of orchids on her body. Then he slowly continued to drink the cold porridge water. His heart was still gloomy as he guessed at her purpose. In any case, no matter what her purpose was, once his body recovered, he would slowly clean up those who bullied him. "Don't even think about running away." Wei Wei Bai came again on the third day. After exchanging a few words with Chichimu, she left again. Even if it was just to sit for a while. The people in the residence were also shrewd and immediately had a better attitude towards Chichimu. Chapter 806. Chichimu treated those who came to curry favor gently. Weiwei Bai came again on the 4th day bringing some food. It's made by my small kitchen. The big kitchen won't make these. You can eat it. Chichimu looked at this cousin. After thinking about it, he finally said with a smile, "Cousin, I heard that your handwriting is good. I need to copy books recently. Can you help me copy a few pages?" The awkward smile on Weiwei Bai's face froze. She bit her lip and snorted. She seemed to be angry at him for taking a yard after giving her an inch. Just as Chichimu thought she would turn and leave, she said in a muffled voice, "Okay, where do I copy?" Chichimu smiled, then pointed to the table by the window. Weiwei Bai said to the system, "He's probably suspecting something." System, suspecting what? Suspecting that you're possessed or reborn. Weiwei Bai, both. After all, handwriting is the easiest way to distinguish a person's identity. Weiwei Bai, who had long been prepared, picked up a pen and began to scribble. Her handwriting was uniquely ugly. Chichimu was about to go blind from looking. It was indeed Weiwei Bai's handwriting. He remembered that in his previous life, Weiwei Bai had always been coaxed by others. So even if her handwriting was ugly, they would still praise her against their conscience. He had seen her handwriting a few times, and it was so ugly that it left a deep impression. Later, she realized that her handwriting was not good and began to study hard, so her handwriting was different. If she really encountered the same situation as him, her handwriting would definitely change. Very good, it hadn't changed. It was still unbearably ugly. Chichimu relaxed and began to sit by the side, copying books. He had always been alone. It was rare to have someone by his side. Weiwei Bai was not someone who would sit still. From time to time she would look up. There were many small movements. The young girl's fragrance was too obvious, mixed with the warmth of the charcoal stove. It made Chichimu somewhat suffocate. He glanced sideways and saw that the impatience between her brows was very obvious. But there was forbearance. Chichimu was not in a hurry. He was good at enduring, so he could endure until she revealed her purpose. After copying a few pages, Weiwei Bai suddenly said, "I remember my mother calling me. I'll leave first, cousin." Chichimu thought for a moment before nodding. "My body is more or less healed. Do you want me to serve you tomorrow morning?" She always let him dress her up and dress her up. He would remember this humiliation even if he died. When Weiwei Bai thought of this, she stopped in her tracks and immediately turned her head. Her eyes actually lit up. "Of course I can if my body recovers. Look at my face." Chichimu thought that because of some unspeakable objective, she would continue to be hypocritical for a while longer. In the end, she still wanted him to serve her? Simply, his anger was interrupted by a sudden accident. Weiwei Bai's face suddenly came close to his. Her gentle breath brushed against his face, causing him to tremble uncontrollably and almost want to back away. But she acted as if nothing had happened, still doing her best to come closer. Her soft and delicate cheeks were suffused with pink, and her pair of black jade-like eyes were bright and clear. The young girl's fragrance, with its offensive power, completely wrapped him up. Chichimu endured silently, his fingers unconsciously clenching. He pursed his lips, his expression calm. Weiwei Bai reached out and pointed at her eyebrows in dissatisfaction. "Look, none of those servants can compare to you. They can't draw well. Ask them to draw a flower and they can't draw it." That required a certain foundation in painting. The servants by her side couldn't learn all the words. Chapter 807. "That's why your makeup looks very good." She smiled, her smile full of smiles, like the newly bloomed flowers on the old plum tree outside the window. "Looks mislead people." Chichimu lowered his eyes, his breathing unsteady. The scent on her body. It always reminded him of the feeling of death. It was too profound, but it was especially sensitive. He said softly, "If cousin wants to draw a flower, I'll draw one for you right now." Weiwei Bai immediately sat down properly, somewhat excited. Women all loved beauty, especially beauty that was different from others. Chichimu was aware of her temperamental nature. She could say that she was beautiful right now. Later she might angrily let him die. Chichimu brought over paints. They were all ground from plants and could also be used on the face. He lowered his head and said softly, "All right, raise your head." Weiwei Bai obediently raised her head and glared at him. Her eyes were filled with his shadow. Chichimu couldn't help but say, Close your eyes. Wei Wei Bai immediately closed her eyes. When did his cousin become so obedient? When she closed her eyes, the expression on Chi Chimu's face disappeared, and his eyes turned gloomy. Then he lightly drew a plum blossom between her brows. She still raised her head, not opening her eyes. She was quiet and beautiful. Chi Chimu stared blankly for a moment before retreating a few steps. Done. The first thing Bai Weiwei did was to find a mirror and look left and right. She said to the system, I feel like I'm the #1 beauty in the world. System, wake up, look at the -45 favorability. There are dozens of dogs behind us. Weiwei Bai, this flower was born for me. The system held its head in despair. Doggy doggy, Weiwei Bai turned to Chi Chimu. Does it look good? This was her narcissism and forcing others to praise her. Chi Chimu said calmly, beautiful. There was no sincerity at all. Sure enough, Weiwei Bai gave a cold snort, and then reluctantly revealed a friendly expression. Then I'm leaving, cousin. After he finished speaking, his footsteps were still hurried. His back was emotionless as he disappeared through the door. Chi Chimu sat indifferently, then picked up the brush again and began to copy the book. After copying a few pages, he realized that he was distraught. Then he put down the pen and saw that the pages she had copied were in a mess. He picked it up and took a look. The handwriting was so ugly that it was an eyesore. Chi Chimu suppressed his anger and placed the paper in the cabinet where he kept his books. After sitting for a while, he found that his heart was still unable to calm down. In the past, when he was alone, he had never felt this way. There was the scent of another person in the room. He suddenly got up and opened the window. The cold wind blew away all the smells in the room. He was finally feeling better. Chi Chimu wondered again what Weiwei Bai's goal was. In his previous life there was no such thing. After thinking for a while, he took out the letter again and tried to copy it a few times. Finally, he managed to write down the handwriting of the Bai family's bastard son, Bai Jiming, the young man who had tried to feed him the medicine of the tiger and wolf a few days ago. He wanted Bai Jiming to pay the price. After Chi Chimu finished writing the letter, he used some methods to send it to a concubine of the Li family in the east of the city. Bai Jiming and that concubine had been unclear for a period of time. The Li family's head was a bandit and his conduct was cruel and terrifying. But perhaps because of retribution, a house full of women couldn't give birth to a son. And that concubine gave birth to a son at the beginning of the year. This made the Li family's head so happy that he invited the entire city to a banquet for 3 days. Chi Chimu knew that the child was Bai Jiming's. But Chapter 808. He remembered that the Bai family had just paid a visit to a famous scholar, who also intended to take Bai Jiming as a student. In his last life, Bai Jiming had become that great scholar's student as he wished. He was flushed with success for quite a while. Chi Chimu stood by the window looking at the snow outside, his eyes terrifyingly cold. In this life, those who made him suffer should not think of having a good time. Chi Chimu smiled. He suddenly thought that he could also make use of Weiwei Bai in this matter. As expected, Weiwei Bai came again the next day. She hurried over, panting, her clothes fluttering, but her hair was not tied up and her face was bare. When Weiwei Bai saw him, her eyebrows rose, the light in her eyes turning into flames that scorched people. Didn't you say you were going to dress me up? I've been waiting for quite a while. This aggressive manner. Was she going to hold him accountable? Chi Chimu breathed a sigh of relief. This was Weiwei Bai. Then he said unhurriedly, Biaomei, I just remembered that I had something to do today, so I didn't look for you. Weiwei Bai might have been anxious and angry from waiting and couldn't care about the hypocrisy. What matter can be more important than my matter? Chi Chimu's eyes were dark, but he hurriedly apologized. It's all my fault. I'll dress you up right now. Weiwei Bai angrily stamped her feet. You, she held back the harsh words in her mouth, took a deep breath and sat down reservedly. Then hurry up. Chi Chimu nodded and a maid followed behind him. The maid ran to fetch the makeup box. Chi Chimu began to lower his head and dress her up. Perhaps it was the first time he didn't bring shame to dress her up. Chi Chimu discovered that her skin was indeed good, so fine that when his fingertips slid over, he was reluctant to let go. When he drew her eyebrows, the corners of her eyes carried a peach blossom redness. That kind of charm was not alluring. Chi Chimu's movements slowed for a moment before he held his breath and continued. Finally, he drew a flower between her eyebrows. Bai Weiwei opened her eyes. Her pair of clear and bright eyes immediately added 3 points to her face. A dark light flashed through Chi Chimu's eyes. It was like seeing his work suddenly become perfect. This feeling was actually not bad. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at -40. Chichimu ignored the different feelings in his heart and exchanged a few perfunctory words with Wei Wei Bai. He suddenly said, I need to go out for a while. Wei Wei Bai instinctively asked, where are we going? Chichimu smiled. Go buy books. Wei Wei Bai rolled her eyes and immediately stood up. I'm going to buy books too. Let's go together. Chichimu hesitated. That's not good. You're a girl, how can you go out alone? Wei Wei Bai quickly reached out and grabbed his wrist. Don't I have you with me? Chichimu's muscles tightened, almost wanting to shake off her hand. But at the critical moment he held himself back. He smiled calmly and nodded. Then let's go. Once they were out the door, Wei Wei Bai was like a free bird, asking for tanghulu and small round fans from roadside stalls. For the first time, Chichimu felt that bringing a woman out was troublesome. When it was about time, Chichimu took her to the study. He bought several books needed for the imperial examinations. Although he had already memorized the questions for the imperial examinations, he didn't fall behind on the things that needed to be done. After all, if a person who had been reborn was discovered by others, that would be an existence akin to demons or ghosts. Their ends would usually not be good. Wei Wei Bai also picked out a few books in passing. Chichimu glanced at them. Gongren, you inserted me very beautifully. To read //. Download to read the Chapter 809. Chichimu, this simply left him speechless. Wei Wei Bai also recommended, do you like this too? I heard that Gene X May is pretty good. I'll lend it to you. Chichimu's face was taut. No need. Wei Wei Bai didn't force him. She hurriedly wrapped it up and took it back to pass the time. When they returned, Chichimu brought Wei Wei Bai in through the back door. He felt that it was about time, so he brought her into the garden. After passing through a path, he finally stopped and asked with a puzzled expression, did you hear something? Wei Wei Bai was absent-minded. What sound? Chichimu's eyes were cold, but he still spoke in a gentle voice, it seems to be a very painful sound. Wei Wei Bai was puzzled. Very painful? Chichimu pulled on her sleeve and walked forward, arriving outside a remote side room. Waves of sound came from inside. You damned heartless person, only coming to find me now, You little hussy without my XX, are you going to live on cucumbers? I heard that old man Li is over 70 years old. He can't take it anymore, huh? Chichimu and Wei Wei Bai, this was a shameful line. This was a perverted roar. Wei Wei Bai immediately wanted to kick open the door with awe-inspiring righteousness. Who's inside? Are they fighting? Chichimu hesitated and suddenly pulled her back. Don't look. How could Wei Wei Bai listen to him? The door was already kicked open. The adulterous couple inside also revealed their faces. It was that Li family's concubine. And Bai Jiming. When Bai Jiming saw Wei Wei Bai, he hurriedly wrapped himself in a quilt. Older sister? The person who came was actually his older sister Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai frowned and looked at him. She then looked at the naked woman and suddenly realized something. Her face reddened as she gritted her teeth and said, Bai Jiming, you're actually so dirty. Chichimu also frowned when he saw how dirty the scene was. He saw that there were already servants running over. Knowing that things had gotten out of hand, he immediately grabbed Wei Wei Bai's arm and dragged her out without hesitation. If an unmarried woman appeared here, it would be bad for her reputation. This was the reason why he chose Wei Wei Bai. She was also one of the targets of his revenge. He wrote a love letter to the Li family's concubine. He asked her to meet him at the Bai family. The invitation was in Bai Jiming's name and handwriting. Bai Jiming, that lecherous ghost, coupled with that concubine's deliberate seduction, would definitely roll around together. Then they spread the news that the child was Bai Jiming. Bai Jiming's fate would not be good. The matriarch of the Bai family, Wei Wei Bai's mother, Madame Bai, had also come. When she saw the scene, her face darkened. She said fiercely, tie him up for me. And that woman, send her back for me. Send her back secretly. Don't let anyone know. Madame Bai was shrewd and knew that no one would benefit if things got out of hand. Then she turned back and saw that her daughter was also there. What kind of occasion was this? An unmarried woman appeared here. Did she still want to marry? Wei Wei Bai was a little afraid. Mother. Madame Bai glared at her and slapped her. I spoil you when you usually mess around, but is this something you can get involved in? I'm so angry. Wei Wei Bai looked at her, not knowing what to do, and tears fell. Her eyelashes trembled, and then she glanced at Chichimu timidly. Chichimu didn't expect that Madame Bai would directly hit someone. Chapter 8:10. He pursed his lips and didn't say a word, but the relief of having succeeded in his scheme grew heavy in his heart. It was revenge, and the revenge was successful. Shouldn't he be happy? When Madame Bai saw Chichimu here, she flew into a rage. Was it you who brought Weiwei here? Come, tie him up for me, please, use the family law. Weiwei Bai felt that she should come out to fish for favorability points. She was about to say, don't hit, it's all my fault, it has nothing to do with him. In the end, the words didn't come out. The side mission notification came. Please whip the male lead 20 times within a quarter of an hour, otherwise woof woof woof. Woof your whole family woof ah. She protested to the system, isn't this repeating the bullying from the previous life? There wasn't this in the previous life, let alone beating people? Although there were vine whips to bully people, it wasn't in this kind of situation. System, because things have developed differently, you may lose the opportunity to whip the male lead in the future, so the mission will change, but bullying the male lead won't change. Weiwei Bai. This mission makes it impossible for people to exploit loopholes. Chichimu was quickly dragged to kneel in the snow. The family law was vine whips, tough with steel and coated with tung oil. With one whip the skin would split open. Madame Bai gritted her teeth and said, beat him fiercely for me. 10 whips for the little bastard of the Chi family, and 5 whips for that disappointing one. If the body wasn't good, 10 whips could take a life. Madame Bai thought of the law wanting to kill Chichimu. Chichimu frowned, not expecting this woman to be so vicious. Weiwei Bai hurriedly came out. Wait, mother. Madame Bai snorted. Don't beg for mercy for him. Weiwei Bai pulled at her hand, aggrieved. You don't love me, mother? This matter isn't my fault. It was cousin who let me go out that I encountered him, so 10 whips aren't enough. At least 20 whips are needed to appease my anger. Chichimu raised his head, the coldness in his eyes almost like knives as he looked at Weiwei Bai. Weiwei Bai didn't feel the slightest bit. Madame Bai immediately nodded. Then 20 whips. Weiwei Bai said, I'll do it myself. Saying this, she snatched the vine whip and went behind Chichimu, whipping him with all her might. Chichimu originally hated to bleed, but as a result, when that whip landed on his body, it was light as a feather and didn't hurt at all. He frowned and lashed out a second time. It didn't hurt much. That frightening whipping method only had a trace of strength left when it came to him. He was being deliberately controlled by someone, and there was no sense of punishment. Chichimu hesitated for a moment before turning around. However, he saw Weiwei Bai's face tensed up. She then winked at him and whispered to him. Why don't you shout? This guy didn't even know how to cry out in pain. He would be exposed very soon. Chichimu stared blankly at her before turning his head, deep in thought. Weiwei Bai became anxious and couldn't help but increase the strength of her whip. As expected, this whip made Chichimu groan in pain. Weiwei Bai immediately lightened her strength. Chichimu's expression became complicated. Like this, not to mention 20 whips, even 100 whips might not be able to penetrate his flesh. So she was saving him? Chichimu didn't know what to feel, even though he knew that Weiwei Bai's change in personality was strange. However, this was the first time that someone had deliberately let go of the whip to protect him during the humiliation. Just this bit of kindness. It actually made him feel a trace of guilt towards her. Ding, male lead -35. After the whipping, Chichimu lay on the ground. Although his injuries weren't serious, he still had to put on an act. Madame Bai was satisfied and led Weiwei Bai away. She allowed Chichimu to lie down. Bai Jiming was also carried away. Not long after, he heard Weiwei Bai's voice. Quick, quick, has the doctor been called? Chichimu's tense breath finally relaxed for some reason. Only then did he know the reason why he had been lying down when he could have gotten up. Was he waiting for her? Chichimu was carried away in a daze. Soon a doctor came to treat him. He looked up in a daze and saw Weiwei Bai standing to the side. You can't die, do you understand? Why did she care about his life and death? Chichimu pondered in confusion, but his thoughts were still unrealistic. Was this the feeling of being worried about? Ding, male lead -30. Chapter 8:11. He even remembered the beautiful softness under her collarbone. Ding, the male lead's favorability is -25. Outside the door, Weiwei Bai heard the favorability notification, and the expression on her face vanished. She looked at the door thoughtfully. Finally, the system couldn't help but ask, what are you thinking about? It had the expression of a big villain. Weiwei Bai. His physical strength isn't good enough. System? Weiwei Bai. Chichimu's physical strength is too weak. When he was carrying me just now, he almost couldn't hold on. After so many planes, this was the first time she had encountered such a weak target. She expressed that it was delicious. The system paused for a moment. Isn't it because you're too heavy? Wei Bai. Suddenly she didn't want to sigh anymore. Wasn't it just a round face? This had nothing to do with weight. After taking 2 steps, she noticed something and looked up. A notification bar appeared above her head. Within 2 days, get Chi Chimu into the ice cave of the lotus pond. If not, woof woof woof. Woof 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 your grandpa. Wei Bai asked the system, what does your main system look like? System, not as handsome as me. Wei Bai, if I had the chance to know it, could I lead 2 dogs and woof it to death? System, how can you blaspheme my main system like this? 2 dogs aren't enough, get 20? It had long found that idiotic main system unpleasing to the eye. Failure of the side mission meant punishment. But it had never heard of a punishment system. This was because it saw that it was handsome, so it was jealous and wanted to mess with it. Wei Bai threw Chi Chimu until he doubted life. Her original plan was to wait a few days before going to see him again. This way she could let his longing ferment and make him unaccustomed to her disappearance. Now the evil side mission forced her to change her plan. This mission was too cruel, making her think for a while before reluctantly making a plan. She disappeared for a day until the day of the mission. Wei Bai wore a thick jacket and skirt, draped in a fox fur cloak, and returned to Chi Chimu's shabby house. She hesitated and leaned against the window. There was a heater inside, so the windows were slightly open for ventilation. She stood on tiptoe and cautiously looked through the gap, discovering that Chi Chimu was writing something by the window. Chi Chimu had long noticed the delicate figure outside. His eyes were dark and there were dark circles under his eyes. For some reason he had never been close to a woman's body before. Hence when he hugged Wei Bai he saw her body. It made him unable to eat or sleep in peace. He could not shake off that image at all. He knew that it wasn't love. It was just a kind of impact that he couldn't recover from. Chi Chimu originally didn't want to pay attention to her, but when he thought of his mother's hairpin, the brush in his hand became heavier. A copy of the calligraphy was destroyed. Chi Chimu looked on coldly before throwing away the brush. Just as he was about to push open the window, he realized that a fair hand had already pushed open the window, revealing Wei Bai's plain but beautiful face. She wore no makeup. Only then did Chi Chimu recall that she seemed to only like him to dress her up. If he didn't go, she would rather wear a plain face. Wei Bai hesitated. Biaoga, by the lotus pond, the plum blossoms are blooming beautifully. Let's go admire the plum blossoms, ba. Chi Chimu pursed his lips, many complicated thoughts turning in his mind. Finally he nodded. Wei Bai revealed a smile. Chi Chimu's eyes darkened. He no longer looked at her and walked out. The two arrived at the lotus pond. The pond was frozen solid, and the plum blossoms were on the other side of the pond. Chapter 8:12. The two strolled on the ice, walking and walking. Chi Chimu suddenly grabbed Wei Bai's hand. Let's go this way. The ice over there is thin. Wei Bai nodded and abruptly asked, Biaoga, do you still remember things from your childhood? Chi Chimu was silent for a moment. I don't remember much. Wei Bai immediately looked at him excitedly, seeming somewhat nervous. Then do you still remember what your parents gave you? Chi Chimu's heart sank. He said calmly, what did they give me? This I somewhat can't remember. Wei Bai's gaze was somewhat erratic. It was something like a map or some other kind of paper or something. Map? Chi Chimu's pupils shrank. She knew. She knew of the enormous wealth his parents had left him. This wealth had to be a secret. Chi Chimu was very clear that his future path would be smooth and smooth. It was all because the third prince had ascended the throne and supported and trusted him. He and the third prince had a relationship of monarch and subject, as well as a close friend who shared the same ideals. In this life he had a heart full of ambitions and a special philosophy of governing the world, many of which were deviant. And the people who could help him achieve these goals, the crown prince couldn't, nor could the current emperor. Only the prince he had chosen could understand him. And that wealth was the capital for the start of the plan. It was also a crucial link in toppling the crown prince and seizing the throne. So this wealth couldn't be discovered by anyone. Only then would there be the unexpected effect later on. Chi Chimu raised his eyes and watched her rack her brains as if wanting to fish for information. His eyes were deep and cold like ice blades, full of killing intent. Then he wondered if she had been good to him during this time because she had discovered this wealth. That was why she had deliberately come to curry favor and approach him. When Chichimu thought of this, the bit of kindness and warmth he had obtained during this time was eroded little by the chill. Anger came without warning. He panted, suppressing the anger in his chest. He tried to make his voice sound gentle. Are you talking about the blueprint? There seems to be one. Let me think. Wei Wei Bai's eyes lit up. Really? Was there really one? Hurry up and remember. The fire in Chichimu's chest was not scorching hot, but icy cold. It was so cold that it penetrated his bones. It made him tremble all over. He had already lived 2 lifetimes, yet he was still expecting the venomous snake to treat him gently. Foolish beyond measure. He clearly knew from the beginning that this woman in front of him was black-hearted, but he was still greedy for the little bit of companionship she brought. Chichimu forced out a cold smile. Cousin, you've been so nice to me all this time. Is it because you want my blueprint? Wei Wei Bai's eyes flashed with a trace of guilt. That's not true. Why would you think that? I just casually mentioned it. What else did Chichimu not understand? He lowered his eyes and said in a calm and gentle tone, there is a blueprint, but I don't know what it is for. If you want it, I'll find it for you. After pausing for a moment, his voice was filled with infinite malice. After all, you're my favorite cousin. Wei Wei Bai didn't hear the malice in his words at all. Her eyes were bright, her expression happy. You're so nice. I'll be good to you in the future and won't bully you anymore. Chichimu's tone was indifferent. There will be no future. With that, the ice under his feet cracked open. He led her to a place where the ice was thin, and then with a push of his foot, the ice cracked open. Wei Wei Bai was stupefied, a trace of panic flashing across her face. Then she looked up and found that Chichimu was already standing in the thick ice. The ice under her feet had already shattered and she fell straight down. Ice water splashed over her head, pulling her down. Chichimu watched on expressionlessly, his eyes incomparably gloomy. He had never forgotten the humiliation the Bai family gave him, the humiliation they gave him. Wei Wei Bai was one of the targets of his revenge. She might as well just drown like this. Chichimu sneered. Just as he turned to leave, an icy hand grabbed a corner of his robe. He frowned and immediately turned back. Only to see Wei Wei Bai struggling, her entire body trembling, her face deathly pale as she looked at him pitifully. Her eyes were soaked in ice water, appearing even more penetrating. She said pitifully and fearfully, Biaoga, save me. Her voice was weak, trembling so much that one couldn't bear to see it. Chichimu looked at her indifferently, suddenly revealing a smile. He crouched down and slowly pried open her fingers. Okay, big brother will save you now. With that, he fiercely used his fingers to pry open her hands and then pushed with force. Wei Wei Bai was pushed into the ice water. Chichimu stood up and looked at her slowly sinking body in the ice water. After standing for a while, he turned around and walked forward with somewhat disorderly footsteps. They all deserved to die. The people of the Bai family all deserved to die. So if she died, he wouldn't feel any pity. // Download. Chapter 8:13. Wei Wei Bai was pushed into the water and mumbled to the system, "Did I hear the sound of life subsistence guarantee?" The system was calm. When people fall into ice water, they will die very quickly, so life subsistence guarantee automatically activated. As long as there were no fatal injuries with life subsistence guarantee, they wouldn't die no matter what. Wei Wei Bai mumbled, "Then why didn't Chi Wuqing come to save me?" Yes, the method she thought of was to fall into the ice water herself, and then Chichimu would jump in to save her. After all, side missions also had loopholes. They only asked for the result, not the process. So as long as Chichimu entered the water, it would be fine. For the sake of favorability, she could only sacrifice herself and weaken the process of bullying him. Letting him jump into the ice cave of his own accord was the best. System? He was very happy and swaggered away. He finally got rid of you, this scourge, so how could he take the initiative to jump in to save you? Wei Wei Bai smiled coldly. I dared to let him push me down, so I have a way to make him crawl back to save me. She had just said so. The ice water above her splashed, but she saw Chichimu's gloomy expression as he eagerly swam towards her. Wei Wei Bai was very relieved and closed her eyes. On top of Chichimu, many people had already surrounded the pool. On the ice they also began to save people. He was about to leave, but before he could walk out of the ice layer of the pool, those manservants and maidservants happened to come face to face. Moreover, there were maidservants who discovered Wei Wei Bai's clothes floating out of the water. The pool was immediately surrounded by people. If he swaggered away and Wei Wei Bai died, he would be the murderer. Chichimu's mind turned quickly. Before anyone could clearly see his forward movement, he plunged into the ice water again. At this moment he wished he could drown Wei Wei Bai. Then he would pretend to not save her in time and draw a clear line. In any case, those people above had already seen that he came to save people, so the suspicion of Wei Wei Bai falling into the water could be washed away. Chichimu only felt that his limbs and bones were soaked in ice water. His body had finally gotten better, and he didn't know how long it would take for him to recover. He struggled to stay in the icy water, his eyes cold. He turned his head and finally looked down. In the hazy mist. Her dress was like a blooming lotus in the water, giving off a dreamy sense of beauty. Then he saw that within the floating robe, her face was extremely pale. Her brows were tightly furrowed, and her lips had lost their color. She slowly sank to the bottom of the pool. He let her fall. She died. Chichimu gritted his teeth and glared at her. His eyes were bloodshot, so red that they looked hideous. In the end, he clenched his fingers and allowed the icy water to turn into sharp blades, cutting him into pieces. He forcefully plunged it down and quickly came to her side. Then he reached out and pulled her into his arms. Chichimu didn't even know why he saved her. He never showed mercy to anyone, especially when it came to his enemies. But when he pressed her into his arms, he had no time to regret it and immediately swam up. Rise to the surface. The people around him scrambled to pull him out of the water. Chichimu felt like he had died once. He didn't know what he was thinking, but his fingers trembled fiercely as he pressed against her neck. He found that there was still a faint tremor. He couldn't hold on any longer and laid down, his entire being in a daze. So cold. So noisy. Suddenly there was a cough, soft as if she was about to stop breathing. Chichimu struggled to look to the side. He found that Wei Wei Bai had already opened her eyes. Her pale face was devoid of color, and only her pair of eyes were too black and clear. Flush. Chapter 8:14. Just like that she looked at him. The grievance and pain in her eyes overflowed. Save me, why didn't you save me? Wei Wei Bai seemed to be confused, not knowing that she had been saved. Chichimu was stunned. He was about to explain that he had already saved her. But she closed her eyes again and fainted. Chichimu held back a pile of words in his heart, even losing more than half of his health. In the end he still couldn't kill her. He ruthlessly hammered the ice surface. She really was a star of calamity. The incident of falling into the water, because Chichimu jumped in to save her in time. So the Bai family didn't find trouble, and even Madame Bai had a maid deliver some tonics. To let Chichimu recuperate. No matter how much she hated him to the bone, in the end, he was the one who saved her daughter. She still had the proper attitude. Chichimu saw those maids and wanted to open his mouth several times to inquire about Wei Wei Bai's condition. But when it reached his mouth he swallowed it back down. These 10 days of recuperation. Bai Jiming's matter had completely erupted. The Li family had done something to make Bai Jiming fall from his horse. Coincidentally, his legs were completely crippled from the fall. Bai Jiming could only spend the rest of his life in bed. Chichimu didn't bat an eyelid as he began to think of his next revenge plan. After saving Wei Wei Bai, the Bai family's watch over him was much more relaxed. The incidence of humiliation also decreased. So it was very easy for him to do anything. A certain maid who had bullied him in his previous life fell into a well and died. A certain manservant's face was burned and disfigured while on duty in the kitchen. He was the one who took revenge on them. After experiencing a lifetime in this life he was rational and cruel, able to quietly take care of all the people he wanted to take revenge on. As for the Bai family, he planned to wait until he became the top scorer. Then he would slowly tidy up this family. After doing so many things, he discovered that he had always overlooked Wei Wei Bai. This woman still knew of the existence of that fortune. She couldn't be left behind. Chichimu took out the paper with Wei Wei Bai's name written on it, but the brush couldn't fall. After staring blankly for a long time, he pressed her paper to the bottom with a darkened face. Then he took out the paper of the Bai family's other concubine's son. Anyway, he had plenty of time to deal with her. There was no need to rush. Over at Wei Wei Bai's side, the days of idling and waiting for death were too good. She ate and slept and ate. After eating, she read a book called You Put Me Very Well. Then he continued to sleep, eat, and read novels. He was as shut in as a deity. The system couldn't help but urge, after so many days your favorability has only increased by 5 points. You still have the nerve to eat and wait for death. Wei Wei Bai had just finished reading The Overbearing Prince's Runaway Little Cold Wife. She then flipped open a harem love and hate novel about the emperor and this concubine doesn't want it. She read it with great interest. Needless to say, it didn't lose out to those online novels in reality at all. Wei Wei Bai was very calm. It's fine. It's a year and a half. Take it slow. The system reminded, 1 year, 4 months and 5 days. Wei Wei Bai turned over and continued reading her novel. It's fine. Wait until Chi Chimu comes looking for me. At that time she would soften her attitude and pretend that she did not remember that he had pushed her into the pool. Another sibling relationship strategy. Sure enough, the favorability would definitely increase. Ding, requesting the host to completely expose the matter of Chi Chimu pushing you into the water within 3 hours, then lock him up in the woodshed for 5 days. Wei Wei Bai, the system said resignedly, the side quest this time is indeed a bit crazy. The previous world, although it was also deranged. But it was only deranged once. And this time the side quest had been deranged many times. Chapter 8:15. Is there no end to this? Wei Wei Bai frowned and suddenly said, I seem to have forgotten something. System, forgotten what? Wei Wei Bai, where's my side reward? If it weren't for the side mission reminding her so many times. She had forgotten the reward. Who told the side reward to be of little value. She didn't care about it and actually forgot to ask for it. System, it also forgot. Was there anything else in the trash? She turned it over. The system turned around and shook the trash, emptying a dozen trash cans with great difficulty. Finally, it managed to turn over a single thing that hadn't completely broken. Then it immediately sent out the reward. Rewarding the host with the temperament of having candy when crying. Do you accept? Wei Wei Bai didn't hear clearly for a moment and nodded to accept. In the end, when she finished accepting, she asked doubtfully, what the hell is having candy when crying? The system hurriedly flipped through the manual. It had been thrown away for so long that even the manual wasn't easy to find. After nervously flipping through it, the system let out a sigh of relief. It's that when you cry, it will have a strange effect on the male lead. He will have some kind of pleasant feeling towards you and thus have a good impression of you. Wei Wei Bai said disdainfully, every time I think the reward can't be any more useless, it always breaks through my imagination again and again. This strange reward of having a good impression after crying. It wasn't useful at all. She couldn't cry from beginning to end, right? Could it be that crying could increase the favorability? Just based on Chi Chimu's stone heart, any pleasant feeling wouldn't work. Wei Wei Bai finally concluded, it's better to have a beautiful face. System, in the end it was just beauty. Why did women insist on making those 2 walnut eyes and a sausage mouth beautiful? Changing back and forth, wasn't that face still 2 eyes, 1 nose and 1 mouth? What was the difference? Chi Chimu had just burned a piece of paper and put away the ink, paper and ink stone. The door was suddenly pushed open. He saw Wei Wei Bai, whom he hadn't seen for more than 10 days, holding a small exquisite hand stove in her hands. She was barefaced, but her lustrous white face was like ice and snow, beautiful and cold. She pursed her lips. Her lips were pink and tender and she looked a little less lively. Chi Chimu's action of putting away the papers paused, and then he nonchalantly put them back. Over the past few days, all kinds of plans and resentment towards her had settled down. Now that he saw her alive, he couldn't help but sigh. His mind, which had always been tense, actually relaxed. Wei Wei Bai slowly walked in and suddenly smiled. Cousin, are you feeling better? Chi Chimu's thick and long eyelashes drooped, concealing the emotions in his eyes. His voice was gentle. Much better. How about you? Wei Wei Bai smiled coldly. I'm not very good. Chi Chimu looked up at her and found that the resentment in her eyes was so real. Was he going to shed all pretense of cordiality with him? Sure enough, the next moment she fiercely said in a loud voice, tie him up and lock him up in the woodshed. Several manservants immediately rushed in from outside and tied Chi Chimu up. Chi Chimu didn't defend himself, only looking at her gloomily. Cousin, what do you mean? Wei Wei Bai's face didn't have a trace of softness. Her eyes held traces of resentment as she looked at him. She slowly walked in front of him and whispered in his ear, Cousin, do you hate me so much that you can't wait for me to die? Her appearance and her tone. At once, it pulled Chi Chimu back to before his rebirth. At that time she had always been so vicious, looking at him coldly. Indeed, he couldn't wait for her to die. After Wei Wei Bai finished speaking, her breathing became heavier, blowing in his ear, making his expression tense. He couldn't help but look up at her, only to see the tears in her eyes that she didn't have time to wipe away. They. Chapter 8:16. Wei Wei Bai glared at him somewhat awkwardly before immediately turning to leave. She said fiercely to the servant, "You're not allowed to give him anything to eat. Just let him. She clumsily stamped her feet in annoyance. Just let him die. These words were spoken anxiously and angrily. It was like the arrogance of a little girl, but it didn't feel vicious. After speaking, Wei Wei Bai hurriedly left. She was afraid that if she stayed a second longer, she would regret it. Chi Chimu was pushed into the woodshed by Wei Wei Bai and locked up. The woodshed was even colder than his broken-down house. The cold wind mixed with the cold snow blew in through the cracks in the wooden boards. His lips were somewhat pale as he sat on the haystack, his face expressionless. Because there was nothing to do, he could only pick up a wooden stick and begin to write on the ground. What he wrote was schemes to harm people. If he had known earlier, he would have dealt with Wei Wei Bai first. After all, the more he delayed, the greater the possibility that she would reveal the matter of the wealth. With Chi Chimu's current strength, he could only secretly scheme in the dark. If he was directly exposed in front of the Bai family, he was a scholar without the strength to truss a chicken. No matter how many schemes he had, he wouldn't be able to withstand 2 fists and 4 legs. Chi Chimu thought about the matters before his rebirth. At that time he had also been locked up in the woodshed. But it wasn't because he had pushed Wei Wei Bai into the water. Rather, it was because he had resisted wearing women's clothing and grooming her. He had been locked up for 5 days in the freezing weather. After coming out, he had lost half his life, and the cold in his bones had also been acquired at that time. He hadn't expected that in his rebirth, he would still repeat the previous life's encounter. Chi Chimu smiled coldly, not feeling afraid. The wooden stick in his hand stopped. A sinister scheme had already formed. It was to be given to Wei Wei Bai. Once he came out of the woodshed, it would be the Lantern Appreciation Festival in a few days. This was a festival that had spread from the palace. On that day the womenfolk of the family would go out to play. Chi Chimu coldly stared at the ground, pressing down the weak and peculiar emotions in his heart. I can't be as indecisive as I was in the pool. After making the plan, Chi Chimu felt both cold and hungry. He reached out and hugged himself. Whenever he felt uncomfortable, he would think of Wei Wei Bai's damned face. It was white and tender, like a white plum blossom amidst the ice and snow, with a hint of red. He should have had a vicious heart, but his eyes were clear and bright, without any sense of turbidity. Her face was also round like a glutinous rice ball. She didn't look sharp at all. In his previous life, his chin was clearly a little sharp, unlike in this life. She also seemed to be more beautiful than in her previous life. Chi Chimu suddenly halted his train of thought. He missed her to strengthen his hatred for her, and at the same time to imagine how ugly her death would be. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that something was amiss. Chi Chimu gritted his teeth and snorted coldly. Then, he leaned against the corner of the firewood shed, not daring to think further. After staying up for half a day, no one came to deliver food. Chi Chimu was cold and hungry, staring at the woodshed like a lone wolf. He still had a match hidden in his sleeve. If he really couldn't live on, burning down this woodshed was also a way to survive. Just as he was thinking this, he heard the sound of people walking by outside. It was several female servants passing by the woodshed. One of the female servants couldn't help asking, "Why did Miss lock that Chi Chimu in the woodshed? I heard that the manservant from the main kitchen was not allowed to bring some firewood to the stove." Another said, "I don't know. Even Madame didn't agree with Miss doing this immediately. After all, he had just saved her. Madame said to make him suffer, so there's no rush. It won't be too late to lock him up after a while." Download the https://www.sashu.com/download the full article. https://www.sashu.com download the full article. https://www.sashu.com download the full article. https://m.sashu.com/ Chapter 8:17. Chi Chimu lowered his eyes, his expression indifferent. There wasn't a trace of surprise. That woman, Madame Bai, was extremely hypocritical. He had just saved Wei Wei Bai. If Wei Wei Bai treated him like this, it wouldn't be good for the Bai family's reputation. Suddenly, Chi Chimu frowned as he thought of something that was wrong. Could it be that Wei Wei Bai didn't say that he was the one who pushed her into the pool? If she complained like this, the Bai family would have more than enough reason to want him dead. Why didn't she say anything? The footsteps of the maidservants outside the woodshed gradually faded away. He could still vaguely hear them say, "Do we need to send food to that Chichimu?" Mrs. Still angry. She was so angry that she didn't eat for 2 meals. Who would send food? That's right. Let's not meddle in other people's business. Chichimu lowered his head and looked at the plan on the ground. His back was to the light, his face somewhat gloomy. For a moment he didn't know what Weiwei was thinking. Weiwei took out a steamed bun from her bosom and finished it in a place where no one could see. How is Chichimu now? The system glanced over. Hungry and tired. He's probably going to freeze to death. Weiwei, I'm also hungry. I haven't eaten for a day. The system silently looked at Weiwei's chest, which was stuffed with several steamed buns. To create her own unbearable heartache and the pain of being betrayed, Weiwei had starved for a day. She could only eat steamed buns. There wasn't even any salted vegetables. Weiwei wiped her hands. Okay, let's go send community warmth to Uncle Chibie. No matter how deranged the side mission was, she wasn't afraid of loopholes. After all, as long as Chichimu was locked in the woodshed, it was fine. Who said she couldn't give him food and drink? The system was speechless for a moment. Don't you look like you have schizophrenia? One moment she messed with him, the next moment she sent warmth. Schizophrenia ba. Weiwei, the side mission didn't say that I can't collapse my character setting. I'm not collapsing because I'm afraid that Chichimu will see something. If there's a good reason, it doesn't matter if I collapse into dregs. The system pondered for a moment. What reason? Weiwei. Let me think about it. System, what kind of reasoning is that? At the very least, he had to figure it out before attacking. Chichimu exhaled, turning into a cold mist. His fingers trembled as he took out the match. A fierce look flashed through his eyes. It was better to burn down the woodshed first. In this weather he would freeze to death the next day. Just as he was about to light the fire, he suddenly heard footsteps outside the woodshed. Familiar footsteps. Chichimu could even hear the shattering sound of the decorative beads on her shoes, which were more expensive than others. He put away the match. Was he here to torture him in the middle of the night? All kinds of tortures flashed through Chichimu's mind. He even wondered if Weiwei knew about the fortune, so she locked him up and interrogated him in the middle of the night. The more he thought, the colder his eyes became. Before the door opened, he stretched out his foot and wiped the plans clean on the ground. Then he closed his eyes and curled up, pretending to be asleep. The door opened and a cold wind poured in. He shivered. This weather was truly cold. Then he heard Weiwei hiss, "Damn weather, it's so cold I'm going to die." This voice was tender and tender, carrying an arrogant resentment. Chichimu's back was to the door and he snorted coldly. "You know it's cold but still come?" Then he heard Weiwei whisper, "It's all your fault. You don't know what's good for you. I simply hate you to death." Chichimu's eyes widened, and his sneer turned into indifference, even carrying traces of killing intent. She hated him to death, so she came tonight to kill him? Download // Chapter 8:18. His mind was filled with all kinds of bloody darkness. In his previous life he had suffered too much humiliation in the Bai family. Later, he climbed to a high position and became the third prince's sharp blade in the shadows. He didn't know how many bloody matters he had dealt with. This also affected his personality, making him unconsciously carry all kinds of cold-blooded speculations whenever he thought. Weiwei slowly approached him. Chichimu's body also tensed up. He planned to pounce on her and strangle her to death if she made a move. Weiwei suddenly stopped. Then something was draped over his body, carrying the fragrance of orchids, soft and warm. Chichimu's body was as taut as a block of wood. He reached out his hand intending to attack. But he froze midway, somewhat at a loss. Weiwei was covering him with a quilt. This quilt, could it be poisonous? Weiwei blew on her hand again, her voice softening. So cold. For a moment, Chichimu didn't know whether to turn around and expose her. Then he heard her crouch down behind him and take out something. There was the sound of rustling paper, and the smell of roasted chicken drifted out. She said softly, "If I can't starve you to death, why would I give you food? In any case, you want to drown me. I should tie you up and throw you into the water to freeze to death." These words were vicious but not frightening. At least, Chichimu wasn't frightened at all. He opened his eyes, his back to her. What did she want to do? Weiwei put down the food, then stealthily turned and left. Chichimu frowned as he heard the door to the woodshed close. He slowly turned around and saw a bag of food wrapped in oil paper beside him. Chichimu got up and opened the bag, seeing that in addition to a roasted chicken, there were also some roasted chestnuts. The food was still warm. After being hungry all day, he felt that the smell was simply alluring. Chichimu was silent for a moment before taking out a silver needle from his sleeve. After pricking it several times, he found that there was no poison. He began to eat. This was the first time he ate so much. This was also the first time he had eaten so quickly. In the past, he would not change his slow eating speed no matter how hungry he was. This time he ate the entire chicken before the temperature dropped. He didn't finish eating the roasted chestnuts, so he wrapped them up again and put them in his arms. Only then did he lie down on the haystack and pull the quilt behind him. He found that the fluff inside the quilt was Wei Bai's quilt. It was just that the outer layer of a pretty girl's bedsheet had been replaced with a coarse cloth, so it was hard to tell. This blanket was so warm that it was scalding hot. It was good stuff. Chichimu pursed his lips. What did she want to do? Only when the sun rose did he fall asleep in a daze. He didn't know the answer. However, she suddenly remembered that she had given him her blanket. How was she going to sleep? Also, did she eat anything? These two thoughts flashed through his mind. Chichimu was too tired to notice. He was actually worried about her? Ding, the male lead's favorability is at -15. Chichimu had a quilt and was full, so for the time being he didn't have any thoughts of burning the firewood. He used the stick again and began to draw on the ground. He originally wanted to write some additions to his plan to kill Wei Bai, but halfway through he somehow lost interest. He erased the plan and began to write the questions for the imperial examinations. This was the key to his meteoric rise. In his previous life he was able to become the top scorer. In this life his goal was to become the big and small 3 yuan. Not only to become the top scorer, but he also wanted to be the first in all the imperial examinations. This was the most important and solid foundation for him to enter the imperial court. But Chapter 8:19. He had been reborn, and he firmly remembered those imperial examination questions, as well as many major events that would happen. He could even control the fate of the Bai family. Except for Wei Bai, he always felt that her personality was still so vicious, but her attitude towards him had inexplicably softened. But even if she treated him differently, her methods of bullying him were still the same. If she didn't compensate him after bullying him, then Chichimu felt that he wouldn't be so conflicted. Chichimu wrote all day and erased it at night. Then he sat in a daze for a period of time before realizing that he seemed to be waiting for someone. His expression darkened, and he lifted the quilt to cover himself, intending to rest early. But there was still a faint fragrance in the quilt. He only remembered today that this quilt had once covered Wei Bai's body. For a moment he felt somewhat uncomfortable. Suddenly the door was gently opened. The familiar sound of footsteps and the familiar aroma. In the darkness, his various senses were magnified. She crouched down, the sound of her clothes falling to the ground, the soft sound of her breathing, and that rich orchid fragrance. All made it impossible for him to maintain a calm state of mind. Chichimu heard her put down the oiled paper bag and grumbled in a low voice, "Really annoying, it's snowing so heavily outside." It was indeed snowing outside. Walking all the way her shoes were wet. Chichimu's eyes were still open, his back to her. Only the calm indifference in his eyes was dyed with a different color. He didn't utter a word. Suddenly, a hand gently tugged at his quilt. Chichimu's body stiffened, not moving. Then the fingers gently pulled the quilt up a bit, covering his exposed neck. "Won't freeze you to death," Wei Bai said coldly. Then her fingers moved to leave. Chichimu didn't know what state of mind he was in. Perhaps he was too lazy to hide his doubts, so he reached out and grabbed. His fingers trembled a few times as if he was holding a piece of ice. Why was her hand so cold? Wei Bai jumped in fright and hurriedly pulled back her hand, her breathing becoming heavier. Then she saw Chichimu sit up, his ink-black hair falling in front of his chest. His beautiful face was as cold as ice. In the darkness, only his eyes had a different kind of burning light. A trace of panic flashed across Wei Bai's face. She gritted her teeth and said fiercely, "You didn't sleep?" Chichimu didn't move as he stared at her, his gaze like a knife, sharp and bright. Then he said slowly, "How can I not get up to welcome you when you bring me food?" Wei Bai's expression changed. "Who gave you food? It's more like they gave you poison. Let go." Chichimu saw her anxious and flustered expression. Her fair face was dyed with a thin layer of red, looking very pretty. He didn't let go, but his fingers couldn't help but gently rub against hers. There was a hint of ambiguity in his actions. Cousin's hand is a little cold. Let me warm it for you. Wei Wei Bai's face turned even redder. She suddenly swung her other hand at his face. Only then did Chi Chimu release his hand, blocking her movement. Wei Wei Bai gritted her teeth. Chi Chimu, are you courting death? Chi Chimu's eyes darkened, his voice even softer. Biame has finally revealed your true face. You can't wait for me to die, but you still put on a good appearance towards me. It seems that you really do covet that blueprint. Wei Wei Bai's eyes trembled. What are you saying? I don't know. Chi Chimu lowered his head to look at the oiled paper bag she had put down. Her good intentions towards him had still angered him. He clearly knew that this was poisonous goodwill. He still couldn't remain indifferent. This was what angered him the most. Chi Chimu abruptly reached out and grabbed her wrist, pulling her into his embrace. Bai Weiwei was caught off guard and was pulled into his arms. She was filled with the scent of orchids as he held her. After Chi Chimu hugged her, his fingers stiffened and his breathing couldn't be normal. Too fragrant. He resisted the throbbing arousal brought about by the fragrance. In the darkness, his indifferent and handsome face carried a malicious sneer. Don't you have other motives? Why are you suddenly so good to me? His hand pinched her chin so hard that it turned red. Wei Wei Bai's eyes immediately became misty. She wanted to struggle. But no matter how weak Chi Chimu was, he was still a man and was much stronger than her. He approached her with malicious intent, his breath caressing her face, his lips almost touching her face. Then Wei Wei Bai heard his soft but malicious voice. Still coming to see me in the middle of the night? Could it be that cousin is in love with me and came to offer yourself in the middle of the night? / Download. Chapter 820. You can search Transmigration System. Male God, come to search book. www.sashu.com. In Baidu to find the. Wei Wei Bai heard his frivolous words and appeared both anxious and angry. She pushed him away, but the result was that her strength was too great, and she ended up sitting on the cold ground. Wei Wei Bai's face flushed with anger, carrying traces of embarrassment. Chi Chimu, if you didn't have that secret in your hands, who would care about you? Chi Chimu and the system. Secret? A trace of doubt flashed through Chi Chimu's heart, but he didn't show it on his face. Instead, his expression was unfathomable. I have your secret and you still treat me like this? Wei Wei Bai sneered. You think I want to please you? I can't wait to strangle you to death. The trace of warmth in Chi Chimu's eyes disappeared. His voice turned cold. Then you might as well strangle me to death. There's no need to be so pretentious. This was Wei Wei Bai. His previous doubts about her change in attitude were all shattered. Where had she changed? He was still as annoying as ever. Wei Wei Bai immediately got up and threw herself over. She stretched out her slender fingers and grabbed his neck. I'm going to strangle you to death. I've never tried to please a person like this. How could a person like you be worthy of my favor? Her fingers were ice cold as they passed through the dark snow. Her entire person carried a chill, adding a trace of chill to her fragrance. Chi Chimu didn't know why, but when she wanted to strangle him to death, he didn't feel angry. Instead, her body desperately rubbed against his embrace, squeezing and pressing down, making him ignore the suffocation in his neck. What he felt was more of a strange boiling feeling. Chi Chimu reached out and grabbed her wrist, saying in a muffled voice, Enough, what are you going crazy for? Her body was too soft and too fragrant. He couldn't help but want to avoid it. Some kind of thirst forced him to push Wei Wei Bai away. Wei Wei Bai was pushed to the ground again. She was stunned for a moment, and then her eyes reddened. Grievance and anger surged up at the same time. Her voice trembled. Don't tell anyone. I know that I didn't treat you well in the past. Now that you have something on me, you must be waiting to take revenge on me. She tried to maintain an angry expression, but it was ruined by the choking sound in her throat. He looked even more pitiful. Chi Chimu paused, suppressing the untimely sourness in his heart. Then, with a cold expression, he said, Oh, actually, if you were obedient, I wouldn't take revenge on you. He clearly didn't know what the secret she was referring to was. But the quick-witted Chi Chimu roughly understood that Wei Wei Bai misunderstood that he was in control of some secret of hers. Moreover, she had tried to please him earlier. It wasn't because of the map in his hand either. Looking at her, she didn't even know about the existence of that treasure. Chi Chimu enticed her bit by bit. If that secret is discovered, you definitely won't have it easy. Wei Wei Bai frowned and tears welled up in her eyes. Chi Chimu saw her holding back her tears and inexplicably felt a sense of pleasure. He looked like he was about to cry. He actually found her cute. It made him want to make her cry even more miserably. Wei Wei Bai revealed a smile. Don't say it, okay? Can you return that piece of paper with the 8 characters of my birth date? The paper with the 8 characters of my birth date. A sharp light flashed through Chi Chimu's eyes. Why was she worried about the 8 characters of my birth date? Wei Wei Bai continued, if my mother knew that I was carrying the wrong child, she definitely wouldn't want me. Chi Chimu? Carrying the wrong child? The system, who had just bought a bag of dried mangoes and was watching the play expressionlessly, dropped the snack in its hand. Slash. Chapter 821. You can search Transmigration System. Male God, come to search book. www.sashu.com. In Baidu to find the carrying the wrong child, this kind of 10,000-year-old dog blood joke. Host, how can you be so thick-skinned as to use it? Could this reason be any more old-fashioned? Chi Chimu felt like he had been splashed with a large pot of dog blood. He tried to say, I do know that you were carried away wrongly. I thought you hadn't discovered it. Wei Wei Bai immediately said fiercely, it was my wet nurse who told me. She said that I was someone else's child and that she carried the wrong child to my mother. Moreover, she left behind a piece of paper with the 8 characters of a birth date that belonged to the real Wei Wei Bai. You and my wet nurse were close for a period of time. She died, so didn't the paper stay with you? Chi Chimu finally understood. It turned out that Wei Wei Bai had asked for a piece of paper with the 8 characters of a birth date. She was testing to see if it was on him. He had thought that she wanted a map. Chi Chimu seriously sized up Wei Wei Bai, then thought about Madame Bai's appearance. He reckoned that Wei Wei Bai had been deceived. She looked like she was Madame Bai's biological child. That wet nurse probably couldn't bear her vicious bullying and deceived her, scaring her. She was actually stupid enough to believe it like this. Chi Chimu put a big question mark on Wei Wei Bai's IQ. He had been bullied by such a stupid woman for so long in his previous life. Chi Chimu also began to doubt his IQ in his previous life. He sighed and then his expression changed. His usual gentle appearance disappeared. Instead, in the shadows of the darkness, his overly handsome face carried traces of evil. I know you were carried away wrongly, so you still dare to treat me like this? Aren't you afraid that I will go out and tell your mother? Wei Wei Bai trembled, the tears in her eyes shaking out. She gritted her teeth and said weakly, don't think that I'm afraid of you. No one will believe it. Chi Chimu said, I have that piece of paper with the 8 characters of a birth date. It also has the address of the wrong child. If everyone knows that you aren't a child of the Bai family, your end will be very miserable. So arrogant and vicious. After bullying so many people, he lost the protection of the Bai family. Every minute they would die without a burial ground. Wei Wei Bai stiffened and suddenly looked up to glare at him. What do you want? I'll give you money. Chi Chimu raised his head. Just as he was about to mock her, he saw that her face was covered in tears. Her delicate face was filled with sparkling and translucent tears. It was as if the stamen of a flower had been drenched by dewdrops. There was a hint of redness on her face, making her look exquisite and enchanting. A sense of joy suddenly swept through his entire body. Chi Chimu's mouth and tongue suddenly went dry, and even a crazy idea appeared in his mind. He wanted her to cry even more miserably. No matter how beautiful a woman was, she wouldn't look good when she cried. But why does Wei Wei Bai look so attractive when she cries? He unconsciously covered his legs with the blanket, feeling a little awkward. When Wei Wei Bai saw him retreating, she became anxious and immediately rushed forward. Her tears fell even more fiercely. Don't tell anyone. He was filled with a cold fragrance. Delicate and alluring. His tears were more like flames, burning his breath. Chi Chimu resisted the urge and stared fixedly at Wei Wei Bai's face. Didn't she know that men and women should be wary of each other? Wei Wei Bai was anxious. She angrily said, give me that birth chart. Whatever you want me to do, I'll do it. Chi Chimu's gaze fell on her eyes that were bright with anger. He suddenly said, cry for me to see. Wei Wei Bai was stunned. She found that Chi Chimu had reached out a finger and forcefully stroked her face. Finally, when it reached her eye sockets, his strength lightened. Chapter 822. His dilly-dallying action was ambiguous and close to some kind of hint. His voice became hoarse. Cry a bit and I'll consider giving you the paper. Most people wouldn't say, if you beg me I'll give it to you. What kind of hobby was making people cry? Wei Wei Bai held her breath, unable to cry as she looked at him. Chi Chimu's eyes darkened, and he suddenly threatened in a cold voice. Tomorrow I'll tell everyone that you were the wrong child. Your original parents were slaves who were so poor that they couldn't eat, couldn't wear clothes, and had houses made of straw. Wei Wei Bai was terrified. Slaves? Chi Chimu narrowed his eyes dangerously, the vile thoughts hidden in his heart surging forth. Yes, you are the child of a slave. You will be driven out of the Bai family, have no clothes to wear, no food to eat, and become a beggar. This threat was full of weight. As expected by. Idiot. Wei Wei was scared silly, tears streaming down her cheeks. She couldn't say anything to beg for mercy. She just looked at him with wide eyes and flowing tears. Chi Chimu looked at her with dark eyes, his fingers trembling. He was excited. She looked so good when she cried. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at -10. Wei Wei Bai really shivered. She hurriedly asked the system, what's wrong with Chi Chimu, this guy? Does he like to watch people cry? System, did you forget that crying gives you candy? When you cry, you will emit a kind of thing that makes people feel happy. The more miserably you cry, the happier the person who sees you will be. Happy, the favorability would naturally rise. Wei Wei Bai, how can there be such a perverted temperament? What kind of damned reward is this? The system didn't dare to say. This temperament was used in bed. And it had a function to liven things up. The more she cried, the more exciting it would be for the person watching. Because it was of little value, it was thrown into the trash can. Wei Wei Bai sensitively sensed that when she cried, Chi Chimu's expression was clearly not right. Apart from being happy, why were his eyes like a wolf's? She felt that her persona had almost collapsed. From an incomparably vicious persona to an idiot whose brain was full of grass. Whatever she did in the future, Chi Chimu probably wouldn't suspect. Therefore, she cried until her eyes were red and she looked extremely pitiful. She sobbed and said, I'm crying. Give me the tissue. Chi Chimu stared deeply at her face, his breathing growing heavier. Then he said, it's late today. Come back tomorrow night. Wei Wei Bai's tears stopped. Only then did she realize that Chi Chimu didn't want to give her the paper at all. She immediately got up in anger and ruthlessly kicked him. She kicked the quilt and his leg. Chi Chimu let out a muffled groan, but it didn't seem to be from pain. Instead, it was a kind of faintly discernible pleasure. Feeling wronged, she bared her fangs and brandished her claws and said, if you dare to tell anyone, I'll take you down with me. After saying that, she turned around and hurried out. The door was closed again. In the darkness, Chi Chimu slowly woke up. He was silent for a moment before he slowly lifted the blanket. After watching for a while, he covered himself with the blanket again. His expression was a little gloomy. What happened to him just now? How could he be so excited when Wei Wei Bai was crying? Did he have this kind of hobby before? Chi Chimu didn't feel afraid, only puzzled. He lay down again, his mind combing through the matters after his rebirth. He discovered that the biggest variable was Wei Wei Bai. At first, he wondered if she was like him, which was why her personality had changed so much. But during this period of time together, he discovered that the biggest variable was actually that Wei Wei Bai thought she was carrying the wrong child. And he knew her secret. That was why she was so capricious towards him. It seemed that apart from becoming stupid, she hadn't changed much. Chapter 823. Chi Chimu couldn't help but laugh. Halfway through, he discovered that the scent of orchids still lingered in the air. The smell of death. But it made him hot up and his expression sank again. He had been reborn, so how could he change? When did this illness of seeing people cry, his body would burn up. Chi Chimu was unbearably hot. He could only get up and push away the quilt, then paced back and forth in the cold firewood room. After Wei Wei Bai returned to her room, the system vigilantly warned her. This crying and giving out candy temperament, other than making people happy, won't produce any other side effects? System. Other than being happy, there are no other side effects. Excitement was also a type of happiness. Wei Wei Bai frowned and thought. Then this temperament isn't considered trash. If I cry at every turn in the future, won't the favorability easily rise? Chi Chimu was too vigilant. It was too difficult to brush up favorability. If crying once could raise the favorability a few points, then it would be considered a profit. The system thought of the degree of excitement from this temperament and held back for a while before saying, as long as you're happy. In any case, the worst-case scenario was to look at the bullet screen. There really weren't any other side effects. On the third night, the door to the firewood room opened again. Chichimu lit the oil lamp and leaned against the haystack, reading. He found that after Weiwei Bai left last night, he forgot to lock the door, so he returned to his room in the morning when he saw that there weren't many people. Then he would take some things and come back. He pretended to be calm. Because he knew Weiwei Bai's secret. He was disinclined to pretend to be a gentleman with her. Weiwei Bai stood at the door, looking at him for a long time before hesitantly walking in. Chichimu looked up and said with a smile, "Is Biaomei here to bring me food?" Weiwei Bai's face was taut, as though she was struggling with something. Chichimu wasn't too vigilant. Such a stupid Weiwei Bai really made him lose interest in fighting. He had many thoughts of bullying her. And he actually wanted to see her cry again. Weiwei Bai suddenly gritted her teeth. Her eyes finally flashed with a hint of ruthlessness. Then she raised her hand. The white powder was sprinkled on his face. Chichimu's expression changed. His limbs went soft and he couldn't get up. Weiwei Bai snorted. "I know you won't give me the paper, so I'll have to torture you." Extorting a confession through torture? Chichimu's mind flashed back to his past life, to the things he had done in the darkness. He executed the ministers, tortured them into confessing, and tortured them. All kinds of punishments such as skinning, injecting needles, and pouring mercury flashed through his mind. Indeed, he had a vicious heart. Even if he was stupid, he was extremely stupid. Chichimu was somewhat annoyed that he had lost his vigilance. He looked at her expressionlessly. Weiwei Bai took out a candle. Under the light, she sneered, "Do you know the consequences of provoking me? I will let you know what true pain is." Chichimu watched her take out a candle. The torture of flesh and blood filled with wax flashed through his mind. Cutting open a person's flesh and pouring hot wax into it, the pain was unbearable. His muscles were somewhat tight. The effect of the medicine wasn't too strong. After a period of time, he should be able to recover his strength. At that time, Chichimu gloomily looked at Weiwei Bai, all kinds of punishments turning over in his mind. Then he saw Weiwei Bai take out a book, spread it on the ground and light the candle. It seemed that she had come prepared. She had even brought a book of torture. Weiwei Bai lit the candle and copied from the book. "Take off your clothes and drip wax on your back. Let the other party feel the pain of ecstasy that seeps into your bones." Only when you let out a groan can you be considered qualified, Chichimu? Chapter 824. Even if he wanted to take revenge on a person, resent a person, he shouldn't use this kind of method. This was no different from a beast. Although he wasn't a good person in the orthodox sense, he had never had such filthy desires for a woman. Only when he saw Weiwei Bai did the thought of ruining her come up. He actually wanted to ruin her chastity. That kind of male desire to conquer couldn't lie. He clenched his fists somewhat anxiously. He was truly bewitched. He didn't understand why his attitude towards her was completely different in this life when he clearly didn't do it in his previous life. The disgust he had for her in his previous life was ice cold. He didn't want to pay her any attention, and it took him a lot of effort to look at her. In this life he hated her, so why would he want to bully her? Disgust to care, this wasn't the emotion he wanted at all. Chichimu closed the door with a cold face and a burning body. Then he came back to lie down. He wanted to sleep, but when he touched something, it was actually a steamed bun. She clearly came to torture him tonight to extort a confession. She even brought him a steamed bun? He held the steamed bun with the orchid fragrance in his hand and wondered if he knew too little about Weiwei Bai. Although she was vicious, she was actually still a girl. So she still had some conscience? Chichimu took a bite of the steamed bun and stretched out his leg, bumping into something again. He got up and saw that it was that erotic torture book. His face darkened and he immediately burned the book. Stupid beyond measure. Stupid beyond measure. How could this book be used to torture people? He truly knew too little about her. She wasn't vicious, she had a problem with her brain. Stupid like this, he didn't know how she had lived for so long. After burning the book, his heart burned and he continued to gnaw on the steamed bun. Gnawing and gnawing, he finally frowned and looked down at the position below his abdomen. Damn it, why hadn't the fire subsided yet? A body at this age was too impulsive. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 3. A pitiful 3. It made the whimpering Weiwei Bai stop crying. She expressionlessly wiped her tears. "I sacrificed so much, but it's only 3 favorability." The system said, "I thought 0 was good enough. How did you increase it to 3? Weiwei Bai slammed the table. How else can it increase? The easiest way for a man's favorability to increase is through XXOO. If I leave, shouldn't he feel terrible and think of me? The more he thinks about me, the more he can't stand it. The more he can't stand it, the better he thinks of me. I thought it would increase by at least 10. The system said, you seem to have a lot of experience in this. Wei Bai, this is in exchange for my broken moral integrity and discarded conscience. It suddenly realized that there was nothing it could do about it. Its host had already grown so strong. He knew how to diss himself. It couldn't find her weakness to attack her. How could this be? It immediately picked up the book, 1,000 Ways to Kill Its Host, and started to review it. On the third day of Chichimu's care, Wei Bai didn't see any side missions. She escaped a calamity and immediately rested. Staying up for 2 nights was not good for her skin. Chichimu, this kind of person, couldn't go all out to get close. It was useless even if they did. Because of the small mission, the more friendly they were at the beginning, the faster their favorability would fall in the later stages. Right now she could only take one step at a time. Chichimu hadn't eaten all day and was very hungry. In the end he didn't feel hungry anymore. He looked at the wooden door countless times. He found that it hadn't moved. He could clearly push open the door and go out to find food, but he was like a wooden sculpture, not moving at all. It wasn't until the latter half of the night that he realized in hindsight that he had been staring at the door. Chapter 825. Could it be, he was looking forward to her coming? That kind of thing happening was a huge blow to a girl. It was possible that she would not dare to approach him in the future. Chichimu lay on the haystack, his face gloomy and his eyes sharp. Suddenly he sneered coldly. Whether she comes or not, I won't let her off. She owed him a lot of debts. He hadn't paid it off in his previous life. In this life he would get it back. Chichimu closed his eyes, recuperating. Leaving the woodshed he dealt with Wei Bai. This way she wouldn't affect his mood. He slept for a long time before suddenly opening his eyes. His eyes were incomparably clear and he couldn't help but look at the door. He found that the door still hadn't moved. He reached out to cover his eyes and it was a long time before he could speak. Crazy, what are you thinking about her for? His mind was filled with the image of her milky white skin and her messy black hair wrapped around his body. Not seeing her could torment him. As expected, this woman had a natural enmity with him. Chichimu gritted his teeth. I should deal with her quickly. He couldn't let her affect him anymore. Ding, male lead's favorability has increased to 5. Wei Bai heard the prompt and shuddered. Why did it feel like these 2 points of favorability were not good? Wei Bai left Chichimu hanging for 1 day and 1 night. On the 4th night she ran to see him carrying a food box. Chichimu had his head lowered as he drew something. When he heard the sound of the door opening, he paused before continuing to draw as if nothing had happened. Wei Bai was a bit timid. She stood at the door and smiled fawningly. Biaoga, are you hungry? Chichimu smiled coldly, no longer pretending to be a good person. She had seen the most dangerous side of him before. He had nothing to be afraid of. In addition, he had already decided in his heart that he would deal with her in a few days during the Lantern Appreciation Festival. He was disinclined to pretend to be gentle with her. Wei Bai thickened her face and brought in the food box, then squatted by his side. Biaoga, I brought you some food. It's some. Chichimu had accumulated a day's worth of anger. His eyes were dark and heavy, and just a casual glance from him was so cold that it made one's scalp numb. I thought that my cousin would run away whenever she sees me. Wei Bai's expression stiffened, as if she had just remembered what he had done. She suppressed the anger in her voice and carefully said, I know cousin is joking with me. I don't mind. He didn't mind speaking harshly and harshly. She had no talent for acting at all. Chichimu's voice deepened. You really don't mind? I can't forget your snow-white skin, your soft body, and your lips. Wei Bai's expression changed greatly. Her fair cheeks were dyed red. She got up in anger. Chichimu, you are simply despicable and shameless, filthy and filthy. Don't think I'm afraid of you. If I really am driven out of the Bai family in the future, I will also make things difficult for you. If I go to hell, I will drag you down with me. After saying that, she glared at him fiercely. It's up to you whether you want to eat or not. I'll just let you starve to death. Bah, shameless. She turned around and left without hesitation. Chichimu was silent for a moment. Such a big reaction. Although her heart wasn't good, at least she wasn't the fickle type. She still had some redeeming qualities. Chichimu didn't realize that he had been looking for Wei Bai's strong points all this time. After painting for a while, he felt dull and his stomach was hungry. Chichimu opened the food box and found all kinds of meat as well as exquisite side dishes and a large bowl of rice, full to the brim. It was still warm as if it had been taken out of the kitchen. It had been hurriedly brought over. Chapter 826. A scene appeared in Chichimu's mind. A beautiful young girl carrying a food box crossed the snow, her long hair fluttering as she hurried towards him. This feeling of being remembered, ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 10. Chichimu's face reddened. How could he suddenly imagine such a shameful scene? He had been too bored recently. He sighed and then ate the food. After eating, he didn't wait for a moment. His abdominal pain was like a cramp, and he immediately pushed open the door and ran to the latrine. At first he hadn't thought about the food. As a result, he had pooped all night and collapsed. Only then did he know that Weiwei Bai had actually put croton in the food. He said weakly, "Weiwei Bai, you vicious woman." Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 7, decreased by 3. So much croton it was to pull him to death. And Weiwei Bai saw that her croton's small task was completed again. She only felt that the future was dark. Useless system, when do you think this side task will end? Tongzi, who was reviewing the skills to attack the host, reflexively replied, "Endless, the earth is a circle, there is no end." Weiwei Bai, what? Tongzi, accept your fate. It's impossible to stop bullying, not for a lifetime. -100 is your final destination. What strategy are you learning from others? Do you have the brain? Brainless Weiwei Bai. Was her family's scumbag system infected with a virus? Should I spend some of my life points to reformat it a little? On the 5th day, Chichimu lay on a haystack with a pale face. She still hadn't come. After messing with him, did she think she could escape unscathed? Chichimu's face was frighteningly pale as he sneered. Halfway through his laughter, he clutched his abdomen, pulling until his muscles ached. Truly a nightmare. On the 6th day, the Bai family began to prepare for the Lantern Appreciation Festival. Weiwei Bai read a book with nothing to do. The maid opened the window and outside was the garden where the snow had stopped. Suddenly, the maid came over and bowed her head. Young Master Chi has come. During this time, Weiwei Bai's softening attitude towards Chichimu has affected this servant. Although Chichimu was locked up, no one was allowed to bully him. Therefore, the female servant didn't dare to directly call out to Chichimu. Instead, he politely called him young master. Originally, Chichimu's identity was that of a young master. Weiwei Bai thought of her little mission of croton. She reckoned that Chichimu didn't know how to dismember her in his heart. She could only put on a stiff expression and said, "Let him in." When Chichimu walked in, the youth's figure had already grown taller. His slightly thin figure was as straight and elegant as a pine tree. His black eyes were like water, deep and filled with a warm light. But when he looked at her, the coldness in his eyes was like that of a venomous snake, making her shiver. He laughed softly and said, "I'm here to help my cousin dress up." The newcomer did not come with good intentions. Bai Weiwei choked out a sentence, "No need." But Chichimu reached out and dragged her, pressing her in front of the dressing table, not giving her any time to refuse. Then he scooped up a handful of her black hair behind her, feeling the glossy texture of her hair. "Cousin, why are you being so polite with me? I've missed you very much." Weiwei Bai's expression stiffened, her fingers curling nervously, as though she was thinking of those croton seeds. Chichimu saw her nervousness and his smile deepened. Suddenly, the chatter of several older women came from outside the window. You don't know. Recently, there have been people in the residence saying that it seems like someone was carried away wrongly. That's right, I don't know who was so muddle-headed to carry the wrong child. The older women were only casually gossiping as they passed by. But Weiwei Bai's face immediately paled. Chichimu took out his lipstick and smeared the red rouge on his fingers, slowly rubbing it over her delicate lips. He was incomparably intimate as he leaned against her ear, his warm breath blowing into her ear. His voice was gentle but his words were very vicious. "Cousin, do you know who that wrongly carried away child is? Do you want me to continue advertising and let everyone know?" His revenge came quickly and bitterly. Weiwei Bai's entire body stiffened and she finally said with a trembling voice, "Don't." Chichimu's fingers ambiguously stroked her lips, his eyes dark. "It's not that easy to beg me now. Do you think I'm so easy to coax?" Weiwei Bai was in a hurry to beg for mercy when she opened her mouth and suddenly paused. His finger had accidentally inserted itself into her lips. Weiwei Bai anxiously closed her lips again, sucking on them. The moist and warm sensation made the two people tremble at the same time. Chichimu stiffened for a moment, a flush starting from behind his ears and spreading to his face. Chapter 827. Suddenly he felt a pain in his fingertips and couldn't help pulling them back. He found that Wei Wei Bai was glaring at him. Chi Chimu's vengeful aura withered at once. He pretended as if nothing had happened and pulled back his fingers. With a taut face he solemnly dressed her. He didn't pretend to be overbearing like he was just now. Wei Wei Bai was also afraid that her secret would be exposed. She could only endure and not dare to make a sound, obediently dressing him up. When Chi Chimu had dressed her before, he had felt a sense of shame in his heart. Today, perhaps because he was holding something in his hands to restrain her, he used the attitude of a cat teasing a mouse to apply rouge on her. Without the unwillingness from before, he suddenly realized how close he was to her. His fingers brushed across her cheeks. Her flushed and delicate skin was more fragile than flower petals. His fingers brushed past her eyebrows and found that her brow bone was exquisite and beautiful, not a single point more or less. There was a natural flush at the corners of her eyes, faint but not obvious. It set off her pair of clean black jade eyes, making them even more beautiful. Wei Wei Bai felt her scalp go numb from his fingers. Why was the feeling of this infatuated man so strong? Because of her excitement? Her face reddened even more, as if she was bashful and angry. Incomparably vivid. Chi Chimu paused in the middle of painting her, his eyes darkening. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 10. Wei Wei Bai. This favorability was actually from touching her face. It rose even more abnormally. Chi Chimu suddenly smiled. Biame, in 2 days, let's go admire the lanterns together during the Lantern Festival. Wei Wei Bai trembled. She wanted to shake her head, but under the threat of his dark and silent gaze, she could only stiffly nod. Chi Chimu's smile was even more sincere. He suddenly felt that this black-hearted little sister of his wasn't so useless. At least it was interesting to bully her. His nose was filled with a fragrance. He couldn't help but lower his head and smell her hair. It was also the scent of orchids. This smell reminded him of the feeling before death in his previous life. But that scene faded away, replaced by her fragile appearance as she lay under him, gasping for breath. Those nightmares of the past. It had actually turned into so many lovey-dovey images. Chi Chimu laughed silently. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 12. He stroked her hair and even sniffed it. Then her favorability towards him increased. Wei Wei Bai asked the system, "Why do I feel like this guy is becoming more and more like a tram addict?" The system replied solemnly, "Just touching and you'll gain favorability. If you take off your clothes, you'll gain at least 5 points of favorability. Then you'll have 10 points of favorability. It's very easy for a fool to conquer you." Wei Wei Bai thought about it seriously and agreed, "You're right." The system was silent as it held onto the manual for insulting the host. Generally speaking, shouldn't the host be crying when the host is encouraged to sell her body like this? In the beginning the host was so pure. When did the host become so shameless? He was ashamed of his inferiority. The Lantern Festival was coming soon. The weather was not good and it started to snow in the evening. Wei Wei Bai held the lantern and followed the maidservant of the Bai family outside. Madame Bai and a bunch of older sisters followed along. They were going to guess the lantern riddles and watch the Lantern Festival. Because they rarely went out, everyone was very excited. Wei Wei Bai was absent-minded. "Where's Chi Chimu?" The system looked around for a moment, went to guess the lantern riddles. Wei Wei Bai nodded and didn't ask again. She knew that something must have happened to Chi Chimu today. His favorability was only 12 points, which for a man with hatred in his heart, was equivalent to nothing, comma. Chapter 828. Wei Wei Bai had a good idea of what to do and planned to counter each move when the time came. After looking at the lanterns for a while, Wei Wei Bai felt a bit bored. She saw the lantern riddles up ahead and found a circle of people. Many people were applauding. Wei Wei Bai and her sisters also squeezed over to take a look. They saw Chi Chimu standing on the platform of the lantern riddles. Tonight's lantern riddles finale was to guess the 100 riddles and obtain the best lantern that the lantern maker had worked on for a year. The lantern was a scene of the 4 seasons. It vividly produced the various colors of spring, summer, autumn, and winter. The lantern would also change the color of the light as the lantern turned. It was very amazing and beautiful. Chi Chimu had already guessed the 98 riddles correctly. Everyone couldn't help but stop to watch his expression. The people who were holding the lantern riddles were all crowded to one side. The 99 riddles had just been solved. Chi Chimu had only come up to solve the riddles out of boredom. After all, he still needed to wait for an opportunity to do what he wanted to do tonight. So before the opportunity appeared, he didn't go find Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai also didn't come to find him. He sneered in his heart, hiding a bit of displeasure in his heart. The 100th lantern riddle finally came a more difficult one. He pondered for a moment, his eyes casually sweeping over the bustling crowd. He didn't feel anything about so many people watching. After all, in his previous life when he became the top scorer, there were many people watching. He had long become accustomed to being looked at with adoration. His line of sight suddenly paused. He blinked and turned his head to look at the place he had just swept over. The lights below were brilliant, and the crowd was bustling outside. Wei Wei Bai stood under the light, the warm shadows of the lantern flowing over her fair and beautiful face. She stood slender and elegant, wearing a crescent moon long dress and a fox fur cloak. Her long eyelashes pressed down on her eyes, bringing out a soft light as she stared blankly at him. It was as if he had become a beautiful scenery in her eyes. Chi Chimu was no stranger to this kind of gaze. Before his rebirth, after he became the top scorer, he often saw the adoring gazes of some people. It was also this kind. Chi Chimu's fingers clenched, his heartbeat quickening. How could she look at him like that when he was solving a riddle? She was no different from an ordinary little girl. Thinking of this, Chi Chimu fell silent again. Wei Wei Bai was indeed just a girl. Other than having a bad heart, she was no different from other girls. She liked rouge, face powder and pretty jewelry. She would be very angry at his flirting. The young girl's inexperience and warmth had been displayed in his arms before. Therefore, when this kind of girl saw an outstanding man, she would naturally reveal a look of admiration. Chi Chimu couldn't help but puff out his chest. He was a little proud of his charm that could subdue his enemies. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 15. He smiled faintly and deliberately chose a good posture, raising his head to reveal his handsome side profile, so that his handsome side was completely exposed in front of everyone. Then he said aloud the answer to the riddle. There was a round of applause. Chi Chimu maintained his handsome jade-like appearance, stealthily glancing sideways. The place where Wei Wei Bai had been standing was empty. Chi Chimu, fancy that he had put on such a good appearance. Chi Chimu's complacency from solving 100 riddles disappeared in an instant. He snorted with a cold expression, then turned to leave. Young master, you haven't received your reward yet. The organizer saw that he was about to leave and immediately handed him the prize lantern. Chapter 829. Chi Chimu originally wanted to refuse, but then he saw that this lamp was really exquisite, the kind of exquisite and beautiful thing that girls like the most. For a moment he unexpectedly reached out and took it. Then he turned his head and left the stage. Amidst the bustling crowd, his face was dark and gloomy, without the slightest trace of his handsomeness on the stage. His mood inexplicably soured. Chi Chimu gripped the handle of the lamp and walked forward. Suddenly his footsteps paused. A crescent moon-colored figure ran out from the side. Then she ran headfirst into his arms. Chi Chimu was knocked back several steps and was about to berate her. But he found a familiar fragrance in his arms. He lowered his head and saw Wei Wei Bai covering her nose, tears in her eyes. She said somewhat aggrievedly, "Why is this road so slippery?" It had snowed, so it was definitely slippery. Chi Chimu steadied himself, holding the lamp in his hand. He wanted to push her away but hesitated and didn't. Wei Wei Bai looked up and hurriedly steadied herself. She was somewhat awkward, reaching out to tug at her cloak and coldly snorted. "Didn't you make an appointment with me to go enjoy the lanterns?" These words were spoken as if she was questioning her lover. Chi Chimu vaguely felt that something was wrong with such a slow-witted person. But this kind of wrongness wasn't particularly uncomfortable. He smiled calmly. "I thought Biaomei didn't like to see me. After all, it's a rare night to enjoy the lanterns. It won't be good to see such a hateful person like me ruin your mood." Wei Wei Bai's expression stiffened, and then she tried to put on an icy face. "Yes, seeing you really puts me in a bad mood." Chi Chimu sighed. "I seem to remember that old maid washing clothes. In the morning, she asked me if the matter of carrying the wrong child was true or false." Wei Wei Bai's icy expression cracked. She took a deep breath, seemingly restraining her anger. Then she gritted her teeth and tenderly said, "Biaoga, don't you want to enjoy the lanterns? I'll go with you." Chi Chimu smiled, a trace of warmth in his eyes. He put on an act and said, "My hands are a bit tired. This lamp is a bit heavy." Wei Wei Bai immediately reached out. "I'll do it." Chi Chimu immediately handed the lamp to her. Wei Wei Bai looked at the lights. They were exquisitely made for the 4 seasons and the different colors of the lights. Her angry face froze for a moment, and then she couldn't help but reveal a trace of surprise in her eyes. Chichimu whispered, "Is she beautiful?" Weiwei didn't think much of it. "Very beautiful. Chichimu, this is only possible after answering 100 riddles correctly." Bai Weiwei stared at the lights, no different from a little girl. She didn't even pay attention to what she was saying. No one has ever been able to answer 100 riddles correctly. When I was young, I always hoped that someone would be able to answer them because the prize lights were so beautiful. I've even answered them myself, but I was kicked out after answering only 3 questions correctly. She looked down at the lamp as she spoke. His bright black eyes were filled with surprise. Because her head was lowered, her fair neck was exposed, making her look elegant and soft. With her current appearance, who would have thought that her torturing methods would be so vicious? Chichimu's gaze deepened. He stared at her and suddenly said, "If I answer correctly, I'll give you the lamp, okay?" Weiwei looked up, her voice soaring. "Really?" Her eyes were filled with longing and joy. Such pure and undisguised feelings. Chichimu revealed a smile and coaxed softly, "Come, call me older brother and I'll give it to you." Calling him older cousin was already a disgrace to her. Older brother, this kind of incomparably intimate address, even if she was beaten to death, she wouldn't be able to say it. Chapter 830. As expected, Weiwei hesitated. She bit her lip, glancing reluctantly at the lamp before looking back at him. Suddenly she called out, "Big brother," in a low voice. Chichimu reached for a yard after getting an inch. "What are you saying? I can't hear you." Weiwei's expression turned cold. She gritted her teeth and said fiercely, "Big brother?" This was the same as calling an enemy. As expected, Chichimu was dissatisfied. "Give me the lamp." Weiwei held the lamp, truly reluctant to return it. After all, such an exquisite lamp, apart from the imperial palace, couldn't be bought elsewhere even if one had money. She threw caution to the wind, blushing as she said softly, "Big brother?" This big brother carried a lingering ending note. Perhaps because of nervousness, the ending note trembled, adding a hint of seduction. Chichimu felt his ears itch, if not for her pure face. He wondered if she was deliberately seducing him. Seducing him? He thought that she couldn't wait for him to die. How could she seduce him? Chichimu felt that he was thinking too much, but he still couldn't help but look at her. He found that she was staring at the lamp, completely ignoring him. Was this lamp really so beautiful? No matter how beautiful it was, he was the one who won. He suddenly reached out and took the lamp from her hand. "You finished looking at it? Give it back to me." Weiwei was stunned for a moment before hurriedly reaching out to snatch it back. "Didn't you say you were giving it to me?" "Chichimu, you called me big brother, so I let you look at it for a quarter of an hour. It's very fair. I got this lamp in exchange for answering 100 riddles. You calling me big brother 100 times is a fair trade." How could Weiwei not understand his thoughts? He didn't want to give her the lamp at all. He just wanted to play with her. Weiwei's anger rose in her heart. She reached out to grab the lamp, acting like an arrogant and unreasonable eldest miss. Chichimu saw her like this and sure enough, his gaze turned cold. "Weiwei, do you still want to snatch it?" Weiwei actually didn't want to snatch it. However, a small mission appeared above her head. The mission was to break the lamp in Chichimu's hand. Furthermore, it was an urgent mission with a countdown of 30 seconds. She thought of the terrifying image of the dog chasing after her. She had no choice but to sacrifice her image as a good citizen and snatch it by force. Weiwei was crying in her heart, but on the surface she maintained her angry and domineering appearance. She coldly said, "You played me, yet you still dare to talk to me like this?" After saying that, she fiercely pulled at his lamp, but when the two of them were pulling, the lamp handle broke. The lamp smashed into the snow and shattered. Weiwei and Chichimu were both stunned. A cold light flashed in Chichimu's eyes. He raised his eyes to look at her as if he was looking at a dead person. "I thought you had restrained yourself during this period of time, but it turns out that you're still the same. I don't need to be soft-hearted to you anymore." Weiwei looked at him in confusion. What did he mean? Just as he was thinking this, he suddenly heard a scream. In the distance, a group of horses was approaching. It was a group of bandits from the mountains outside the city. They actually took advantage of the Lantern Appreciation Festival. They came to plunder the city. Weiwei's face was deathly pale. She retreated a few steps about to run. Chichimu fiercely grabbed her wrist. Under the light, he was as cold as an evil spirit. "Biaomei, Do you know what will happen if you are plundered by bandits? Wei Wei Bai looked at him in horror. Don't, Biame, you can't do this to me. Chi Chimu's heart was pierced by her gaze, and he became even more ruthless. You will never know how much I hate you. After saying this, he pushed her towards the group of horses. He remembered that in his previous life, this year's Lantern Appreciation Festival had been plundered by a group of bandits. They had snatched away many women and money. And not a single one of those women had returned alive. Chi Chimu? Bai Weiwei's scream rang out, choked with helpless sobs. Chi Chimu's footsteps paused. He turned back to see Wei Wei Bai being held hostage by a bandit on a horse. He gritted his teeth, looking at her with red eyes. His heart hardened. After planning for so long, he could finally end the woman who had killed him in his previous life. He should be happy. Chi Chimu mercilessly turned around, lifting his feet to leave. He didn't take 2 steps. Suddenly, someone hammered him in the back. His body went soft, and before he could fall, he was pulled onto the back of a horse by a bandit. A bandit next to him shouted, "Why are you snatching a man?" The bandit holding Chi Chimu was somewhat absent-minded, but he still replied, "This little brat looks pretty good, not better than a woman." Chi Chimu felt goosebumps rise on his skin. In his previous life he had never heard of snatching a man. Wei Wei Bai on the other horse snorted coldly. "Little guy who told you to trick me." She had just spent 5 days of life points to buy a flower-like jade sticker to stick on Chi Chimu's back. Now, any man who saw Chi Chimu would feel that he was more beautiful than a woman. If they were unlucky, they would be unlucky together. Chapter 831. The sound of horse hooves disrupted the black night. Trampled lanterns were everywhere in the city. The bandit team that had finished robbing had quickly left the city. On the bumpy horseback, Wei Wei Bai and Chi Chimu both looked like they had eaten. There was a resting place at the foot of the bandits' mountain. It was also where the horses were placed. The bandits happily threw the money they had plundered on the table, shouting that they wanted to drink. The shop owners were all family and immediately brought over good wine and dishes. The women were pushed into a room, and Chi Chimu. Among the group of weeping women, Chi Chimu was particularly conspicuous. He had planned for so long, but because he looked like a woman, he and Wei Wei Bai suffered together. Right, where was Wei Wei Bai? Chi Chimu belatedly looked around. He immediately looked at the group of crying women and found Wei Wei Bai leaning against the wall in the corner, her head tilted, her face pale. Chi Chimu stared at her with a cold expression. He found that she seemed to be in pain. She had never ridden a horse before, and the first time was directly pressed against the horse's back. The intense jolting was indeed very painful. Chi Chimu heard the group of bandits shouting outside the door, happily drinking and eating meat. His brows grew even colder. If not for his lack of physical strength, he wouldn't have been robbed like this. When he thought of how that bandit had treated him as a woman, his face turned even darker. The places touched by that bandit felt like thousands of ants were crawling on his body, and he couldn't help but pat his clothes. Chi Chimu glanced at Wei Wei Bai again. He found that sweat had appeared on her forehead, and she looked even more uncomfortable than before. Chi Chimu hesitated for a moment before standing up, bypassing the crying women and walking to her side. He carefully reached out, wanting to touch her forehead. His hand had just touched her forehead when he was slapped hard. Wei Wei Bai opened her eyes in horror and found that it was Chi Chimu. But instead of letting out a sigh of relief, she became even more alarmed. "Chi Chimu, do you hate me that much?" This question was filled with inconceivable anger. There were also traces of fragile disbelief. Chi Chimu retracted his finger, his eyes suppressing some kind of intense emotion. After a long time he sneered. "Hating you takes too much effort. Hating you is enough." A trace of sadness flashed through Wei Wei Bai's eyes, and her eyes turned red. Tears seemed to be about to fall. However, she stubbornly refused to drop it, as if she was trying to maintain her last shred of dignity. Chi Chimu's breath caught. He finally lowered his head, but his words were still unforgiving. "You better not cry. The more you cry, the more interested those bandits will be in you." The sentence sounded like a threat. But Chi Chimu recalled when she cried, her clean eyes, sparkling in translucent tears, as well as that fragile expression that aroused one's sadistic interest. All men have the same desires. He was excited to see her cry, but other men. Thinking of this, for some reason Chi Chimu felt a surge of anger. It was as if she didn't want anyone to see Wei Wei Bai cry. Especially when she was crying, she looked so seductive. No, not only was her crying seductive, every expression was seductive. She clearly had an innocent and cute round face, but she had a seductive temperament and a vicious heart. How could a woman grow up like this? When Wei Wei Bai heard his words, she immediately gritted her teeth and glared fiercely at him. She didn't cry, but it aroused her hatred. I won't let you go. Now that you've been caught, neither of us can escape. I said that even if I go to hell, I'll pull you down with me. Chapter 832. For him, studying and taking the imperial examinations were only a means for his survival. So when he mixed with the third prince later on, he didn't feel that he should have entered the Hanlin Academy as the top scorer. Instead, he became an executioner in the dark, responsible for executing ministers who didn't agree with him. Even if some were wrongly accused, so what? He didn't care at all. He only cared about whether or not he could live well. Chi Chimu knew that it was about time to run. If he ran out now, there was a high chance of success. He originally should have walked out without hesitation. But for some reason when he turned back, sure enough, he saw Wei Wei Bai huddled in the corner. Her hands were tightly hugging her knees as she stared at him blankly. Chi Chimu was expressionless as he pressed forward step by step. It was the first time Wei Wei Bai had cowered like this. She seemed to have reacted at once. Those women who rushed out were all scapegoats used by him. Such cruel methods, simply despicable and heartless to the extreme. Chi Chimu walked in front of Wei Wei Bai, a huge shadow shrouding her. She bit her lip, her snow-white and colorless face like a fragile flower bud in the darkness. Her slender and thin body helplessly aroused the dark desire to abuse in his body. Bai Weiwei's eyes trembled, reflecting his expression that was as cold as a demon's. She didn't even dare to speak, only desperately shrinking back. It was as if he was more frightening than those bandits. Chi Chimu suddenly felt satisfied. His fear of her actually made him happy. Because this made him feel that he could easily control everything about her. Even her trembling appearance made her seem cute. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 20. Wei Wei Bai trembled even more fiercely. System, why do I feel like this guy is especially demonic? Favorability didn't rise like this. How could there be such an occasion to increase favorability? It was a completely abnormal increase. System, blackening points full bar accumulated in the previous life. It can't be helped. Nothing good would happen to him in this lifetime. Finally, his life was about to improve a bit. In the end, he was made to die by a cup of tea from the original owner's mother, plus the scent of orchids. Any person would blacken into a demonic beast. So Chi Chimu's conduct wasn't surprising. Chi Chimu crouched down and reached out his icy fingers to grab her delicate neck. He didn't use force, but his fingers gently stroked her skin, appearing especially ambiguous and unreasonable. He lowered his voice and said hoarsely, "Come with me, be good." The lingering sound was. But his eyes were full of murderous intent. If she didn't go with him, he would. Chi Chimu truly did have this thought. He thought, rather than letting her be defiled by bandits, he might as well strangle her to death. He had the bandits to cover for him anyway. This was a good. The two people were in a deadlock for a while before Bai Weiwei seemed to accept her fate and nodded. Chi Chimu's fingers stiffened for a moment before he discovered that he had also breathed a sigh of relief. When he came back to his senses, he felt that his reaction was particularly laughable. Time was limited, so he immediately grabbed her hand and rushed out. They rushed out of the room. It was a bloody scene outside. Many of the women who had run away had been killed, lying on the ground in a bloody mess. Blood flowed all over the floor. As for the bandits, they were also drunk and did not hesitate to kill people. For a moment, no one paid attention to Wei Wei Bai and Chi Chimu, who had run out later. Chapter 833. Chi Chimu was very calm, his mind already having a rough map of this black inn. He grabbed Wei Wei Bai's wrist as though afraid that she would be separated from him, and quickly ran to the next room. Wei Wei Bai's face was deathly pale as she looked at him blankly. "What are you doing? Shouldn't this be the time to escape?" Chi Chimu's eyes were grave, his expression cold and cruel. "Daring to catch me, how could I not give them a little gift?" There was some kerosene in this room. Moreover, the inn was made of wood, and he knew at a glance that this wood was very flammable. Even if it had snowed, the wood was very dry. As long as one room caught fire, the entire inn couldn't be saved. Chi Chimu pushed open the window, then turned to pick up Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai struggled. Chi Chimu slapped her butt and said with a frown, "Don't make trouble." Wei Wei Bai's body stiffened. She had already been pushed out of the window. Outside the window was a thick layer of snow, but she didn't feel any pain when she fell. She immediately stood up and looked at Chichimu through the window. She saw him methodically opening the cans of kerosene and pouring it all over the room. Outside, the bandits were still slaughtering and chasing women. But he seemed to be unaffected by it and prepared everything well. This quality of his heart was too frightening. Chichimu jumped out of the window, still holding the oil lamp in his hand. He glanced indifferently at Wei Bai, then without a word, pulled her behind him. Then without hesitation he threw the oil lamp into the room. The fire flared up at once and the unextinguishable flames burned fiercely. Chichimu saw that it was burning and immediately pulled her outside. His next destination was the stable. They had to have a horse to run far. When they arrived at the stable they saw a horse. Chichimu untied the reins and wanted to pick up Wei Bai, but the horse was too high. He couldn't carry her that high. This physical strength? The scene was very awkward. A corner of Chichimu's calm expression shattered. He snorted. Get on yourself. Wei Bai could only get on the horse clumsily. Chichimu also followed, and with a flick of the reins the horse broke into a gallop. From using others as scapegoats to distract the bandits, to burning down the inn, to finding a horse to escape. This was a plan that was linked to one another. It was so meticulous that it left everyone dumbfounded. A cold heart, a smart brain, and the ability to act without hesitation. This was the material for great things. He was only slightly worse than her. The system heard Wei Bai mumbling to itself. For a moment he couldn't eat. The host's face was so big that it covered its bowl of instant noodles. Chichimu's movements were very large, and some bandits saw his fleeing figure. Someone immediately caught up with him. Chichimu's horse-riding skills were definitely not as good as the bandits. He could only turn to the mountain road and take a detour. After running for a while, Chichimu made use of the strategic terrain to throw off most of the people. In the end, there was only one bandit left in hot pursuit. Wei Bai hugged him and felt dizzy. Because the horse was making a sharp turn, her fingers lost strength and she was about to fall off the horse. If she fell off the horse at this speed, she would undoubtedly die. Chichimu was startled and immediately slowed down. This decision didn't go through his brain at all. He clearly should be rational and not care about her. The moment he slowed down, the bandit had already caught up. The bandit extended a knife and cut off the horse's leg. Wei Bai and Chichimu rolled to the ground. Wei Bai was rolled into the underbrush. With great difficulty she struggled to get up, only to see Chichimu being pressed down by the bandit. The bandit originally wanted to kill him, but for some reason he became sluggish and his eyes became absent-minded. Then he suddenly revealed a covetous expression. Haha, you're very good looking. Come, give this uncle a kiss. Chichimu, Wei Bai saw his fucking dodge expression. Only then did she discover that the flower-like sticker was too powerful. Chapter 834. The bandit's eyes were red. He only felt that Chichimu's flower-like face was simply the number one beauty in the world. He held a knife in his hand and pressed it against Chichimu's body. His bearded face was about to approach Chichimu. Even in the face of death, Chichimu didn't have excessive emotional fluctuations. As a result, he experienced for the first time what was called the feeling of his scalp exploding. Disgust, humiliation, goosebumps as well as anger all exploded. He said word by word, "If you dare to touch me, I will make 3 generations of you not have a good death." He was a man of his word, digging up graves, slaughtering young children. He could do it all. But his murderous appearance in the eyes of the bandit was like a coquettish act with pink bubbles. Don't be afraid that this grandpa will defile you. This grandpa will take you as my 18th concubine. Chichimu's cold and hard expression cracked. What the hell was an 18th concubine? He suddenly sneered. You try. The bandit recklessly approached, wanting to kiss him, but his instinctive desire to survive made him abruptly retreat. He was also an expert in the bandit team. This time he was the leader of the group that organized the robbery in the city. Although Chichimu's movements were fast, he wasn't a martial artist. Before the hairpin in his hand could touch the bandit's neck, it was ruthlessly knocked away by the bandit. Chichimu's hand shook, knowing that he had encountered a tough nut. His expression changed, but his movements weren't slow. He immediately rolled away wanting to escape. But the bandit had already caught up and kicked him in the abdomen. The sharp pain caused Chichimu to lose his ability to move. Even if the bandit was momentarily confused on the line between life and death, his instinctive killing intent still appeared. The knife in his hand stabbed into Chichimu's body without hesitation. A large stone smashed into the back of his head. The bandit staggered a few steps, his head covered in blood. He immediately turned around, his big bare face incomparably malevolent. As a result, he saw Wei Wei by looking at him with some fear. The big bare face was covered in blood. He stared at Wei Wei Bai with an abnormally frightening gaze. He howled. Then she raised the knife and rushed towards Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai, a normal person would have amnesia after being hit like this. This bear is too durable. She turned around to run, but her skirt was too long and De Xiong stepped on it. Wei Wei Bai fell hard and hurt her knee. She sucked in a deep breath and raised her head to see a gleaming knife slashing towards her head. Pah! A large rock hit the back of the bear's head again. Big Bear dazedly turned its head and saw Chi Chimu's ruthless eyes, holding a stone in his hand. Seeing that he still hadn't fallen, Chi Chimu smashed him again. The Big Bear bandit collapsed. Wei Wei Bai cut a sorry figure. Her long dress was torn and her eyes were bloodshot. Her delicate and thin body was curled up on the ground. He looked so pitiful. Chi Chimu turned to look at her, pursing his lips and gritting his teeth. He once again raised the stone and ruthlessly smashed it at the bandit. That action was so vicious and cruel that it made one's hair stand on end. Blood splashed onto his face. In the darkness, his face was incomparably savage, but it also carried an exquisite evil. Once the bandit was completely dealt with, he expressionlessly wiped his face with his sleeve. Wei Wei Bai trembled as she looked at him. Chi Chimu slowly walked over, like a wild beast approaching its prey. Wei Wei Bai burst into tears. You want to kill me? This savage expression was the appearance of a murderer addicted to killing. Chi Chimu didn't make a sound. His hands were covered in blood, and the blood stains on his face hadn't been wiped clean. Chapter 835. He saw Bai Weiwei desperately shrink back. He stretched out his foot and stomped on the corner of her skirt. She couldn't move. Then he crouched down and gently cupped her face. In the darkness, his fingers brushed past the tears at the corners of her eyes, his voice low and hoarse. Why did you save me? Weiwei Bai's lips trembled, her almond eyes wide open like a weak kitten, provoking tender affection and making people wish to lock her up. Chi Chimu's eyes darkened. The movements of his hands also became rough. He repeated, Why did you save me? Weiwei Bai was clearly scared to death, but she still stubbornly replied, Who saved you? I just wanted to kill him and save myself. The big bear bandit killed Chi Chimu. The second was to kill her. Chi Chimu didn't believe it. He revealed a twisted smile. Like me, Bie. Do you like me? Weiwei Bai was dazed for a moment, then immediately shook her head. No, impossible. She denied it 3 times. Chi Chimu didn't show any expression, but fiercely wiped away her tears with his fingers. He sneered but didn't mock her. Then he firmly grasped her wrist and pulled her up from the ground. Let's go, someone will catch up soon. Saying this, he dragged her, not caring that she walked slowly, and quickly walked into the depths of the forest. Weiwei Bai stumbled, unable to keep up. She wanted to break free from his shackles. But she found that his grip was tight, as if he regarded her as his possession, not allowing her to escape. Weiwei Bai's knee was injured, and the stinging pain made her unable to bear it. She timidly called out, It hurts. Her voice was weak, without the slightest trace of her previous domineering air. Chi Chimu's footsteps paused. He didn't turn back and continued walking, but his footsteps slowed. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 25. Weiwei Bai gritted her teeth. It wasn't easy to earn these 5 points of favorability. Her feet were going to be crippled. After finally seeing a river, Chi Chimu finally explained, Follow the river and you'll see the official road. With their identities, they would be saved once they reached the official road. Bai Weiwei had no choice but to force herself to follow him. Although Chi Chimu's physical strength was average, he had suffered hardships and his endurance was very strong. He would have no problem reaching the main road if he walked all the way until dawn. But Weiwei Bai couldn't do it. Her character wasn't the kind of person who could bear hardships. If everything went smoothly, she would follow him to the official road. It would be strange if Chi Chimu didn't suspect that she had changed her core. More importantly, he had to increase his favorability. Taking advantage of the fact that the side mission hadn't come out yet, he had to hurry up and farm as many favorability points as possible. Especially Chi Chimu, who was too savage. Apart from his poor stamina, his physical fitness was also lacking. His character and temperament were truly that of a great demon king. If she didn't increase her favorability, she felt that she would be killed by him at any moment. Therefore, when Weiwei Bai saw a hole, she immediately stepped into it without hesitation. With this stomp, it was truly thrown forward. She didn't even want her face anymore. With this fall, it was estimated that there would be several large bruises on her face. Chichimu was startled and almost instinctively reached out to grab her. In the end, the momentum was too great and he was overwhelmed. Chichimu fell to the ground and Weiwei fell into his arms. He coughed several times, gasping in pain. "You." He glared at her. In the end, he found that she was lying on his chest, her black eyes looking at him with pity and fear. She seemed to know that she was wrong and said with some fear, "My foot hurts." It wasn't intentional. Chapter 836. She was normally so arrogant, innocent, and vicious. But now she was weak, delicate, and cute. Chichimu had long discovered that something was wrong with him. Every time she showed a sad expression, especially when she cried, he felt that she was especially cute. This was a man's excited evaluation of a woman. So cute that he wanted to play with her. It was truly a perverted and twisted feeling. There was clearly none in his previous life. Chichimu thought for a moment and felt that he might have been too obsessed with taking revenge on Weiwei. But at the same time, he couldn't remain indifferent to her beautiful appearance. So after a long time, his mentality became twisted, causing him to become excited when he saw her in pain and sobbing. Chichimu suppressed his twisted mentality. He sat up, then reached out and lifted her skirt. Weiwei trembled, her expression changing. "What are you doing?" Chichimu glanced at her indifferently. "Can you stop me from doing what I want to do?" Weiwei might have thought of those people who had died tragically in the black shop. She didn't dare to speak. Chichimu lifted her tattered skirt, revealing her sparkling white calves, exquisite as jade. His movements hesitated. Then he continued to move up, finally seeing an eye-catching blood stain on her beautiful, round knee. She had broken her knee. No wonder she couldn't walk far. Chichimu pursed his lips, his finger lightly touching the wound. Weiwei trembled all over. It was very painful, but she didn't make a sound. He looked up at her and found that her expression was both bashful and angry. This kind of anger was like a flame, burning in her eyes, beautiful and fresh. If other women had experienced those things just now, they would probably have the heart to die. Chichimu didn't know whether he should admire her or not. Perhaps there were some benefits to having a vicious heart. At least she didn't see her collapse after he had killed those women. Chichimu's voice softened. "Stay here, I'll be right back." Weiwei didn't speak, only hurriedly pulling down her skirt again. He got up and turned to leave. Weiwei suddenly shouted, "Chichimu, without me you can't go back." Chichimu was stunned. However, she had already said anxiously, "Don't think of abandoning me. If you go back alone, my family won't let you off. You'll only be fine if you protect me." Chichimu didn't expect that she would think he was going to abandon her. He didn't explain, only saying, "Even if I protect you, you'll probably want me dead when we get back." Weiwei was even more scared. She said timidly, "No, if you let me go back alive, I will protect you." These words were said with extreme reluctance. But it was a blow to Chichimu. Protect him. In both of his lifetimes, he had never heard such a sentence from anyone. And this sentence was said by Weiwei, who kept hurting him. Chichimu found it laughable, but for some reason, a sour feeling appeared in his heart. She interpreted his silence as unwillingness. She was so anxious that her voice changed, trembling as if she was crying. She said, "I can really protect you. I won't let anyone kill you, so please escort me home." Chichimu knew that Weiwei was truly scared. It was dark here, and there were still dangerous areas where wild animals roamed about. No one knew if the bandits would catch up. Leaving her here alone was undoubtedly like waiting for death. In fact, she was already very strong to be able to endure until now and not be a hindrance. Chapter 837. Madame Bai's expression immediately changed and she said fiercely, "As expected, it's a wolf cub who doesn't know what's good for him. Come, tie him up and bring him back. Also, immediately send the young miss home." With that, a few male servants immediately swarmed forward and tied up Chichimu. Weiwei was also escorted into the carriage by the female servants. At this time she couldn't immediately change her words and say that she was just joking. Weiwei turned back and saw Chichimu staring fixedly at her, the light in his eyes burning like fire. He suddenly sneered, incomparably mocking. Then he lowered his eyes and didn't say anything, his entire person becoming even colder and more ruthless. Weiwei was taken home, and after she said those words that dropped the favorability. She kept waiting for the sound of the favorability plummeting. In the end, when she reached the Bai family, there was no reminder. She didn't know if Chichimu was beaten to death. She held her forehead as she watched the female servants carry warm water back and forth, pouring it into the large bathtub. Wei Bai rubbed her temples and finally couldn't help but ask the system, "Side mission, when will it be completed?" "System, there's still some left. In the previous life the original host bullied the male lead too many ways. The side mission still chooses the main bullying method, but it can't stand bullying too many times." "Wei Bai, can I know what the next side mission is?" She had to repeat the bullying methods of the previous life, but those bullying methods were all broken. The data before her rebirth couldn't be consulted. "System. Random, unable to inquire." Wei Bai was also silent. She finally sighed. "Besides being able to chat with me or diss me, what other use do you have?" The system had a virtuous expression. "I can still buy you discounted goods." Wei Bai held her head in despair. Their friendship was over. It was better to untie this trashy system. She felt that this kind of side mission was completely hell mode without any end. Just as she had a little bit of favorability, she was forced to stab the target. Even if she put in more effort, she couldn't attack. He finally understood why this mission was so long and why the host shouldn't be tormented like this. Wei Bai was about to take off her clothes and take a shower, but when she lifted her skirt and saw the bandages on her knees, she thought for a while and put them down. She said, "This era is especially old-fashioned." The system took a bite of the instant noodles and immediately replied, "Very old-fashioned. If a woman's feet are seen by a man, she will lose her virginity and will have to hang herself. There are also things like being drowned in a pig cage for adultery and being burned on a wooden pole for messing around before marriage." Wei Bai's face darkened. This was too old-fashioned. The maidservant had already prepared the water and was about to help her bathe. Wei Bai immediately put on a haggard and pale appearance, looking at the female servant with empty eyes. Then she said weakly, "I'll wash it later." He looked like he had suffered a huge blow. The female servant hesitated for a moment before retreating. Then Wei Bai stared expressionlessly at the door. With great difficulty she finally saw Madame Bai's head maidservant run over. She quickly reached out and messed up her hair even more, and deliberately tore the hem of her skirt to make it look even more tattered. Then she rubbed her eyes, making herself look sad and miserable. Okay, she had an image. The maidservant really did come to invite her to the room in the rear courtyard. That was used all year round to punish servants who made mistakes. There was also the punishment of some heirs who made big mistakes. When Wei Bai was invited here by the maidservant, she saw Chi Chimu tied to a pillar in the room. His head was bowed and his body was covered in wounds. Madame Bai sat in a chair, trembling with anger. Chapter 838. Madame Bai sat in her chair, trembling with anger. When she saw Wei Bai arrive, she immediately stood up and said through gritted teeth, "Wei, are you two already together?" Wei Bai took a deep breath, forcing herself to maintain her persona. She also had to let people see that she was actually lying to frame Chichimu. She could only see her acting skills. Wei Bai raised her head and saw the anger in Madame Bai's eyes. She seemed somewhat afraid. Her fingers trembled fiercely and she looked guilty, but she couldn't help saying loudly, "How could we be together? Nothing happened between us." Madame Bai had already noticed her small movements. How could she not understand her daughter? If she had really been framed, she would have long been smashing things in a fit of rage. How could she be guilty? Madame Bai also noticed that 2 buttons on the collar of Wei Bai's clothes were buttoned incorrectly. There were also some holes in the hem of the skirt that were artificially torn. Her eyes were shrewd and ruthless, and she immediately understood. Chichimu and her daughter in the chaos last night really did have something. Perhaps it wasn't with Chichimu. It was also possible that she had been defiled by the bandits. Wei Bai didn't pay attention to Madame Bai's complicated thoughts. She mulled over the expression of the vicious supporting female lead in the series she had seen. Then she revealed a very clearly vicious expression, tugging at Madame Bai's clothes as she cried, "Mother, Chichimu hates me to death. He wants to kill me. Hurry up and kill him." The tears were fake, the guilt was obvious, and the viciousness was even more obvious. No one was stupid. Wei Bai's conduct, wasn't it clear that something shameful had happened between her and Chichimu? Madame Bai was so angry that she almost fainted, but now she had to figure out the matter. Her daughter herself was clear. After bullying Chichimu for so many years, her temperament was a bit impatient, but she definitely didn't have the guts to kill. Last night, after being kidnapped by the bandits, escaping and coming to the official road to ask for help, It must have been Chi Chimu who had guided her. Because she knew that her daughter, who had barely left the house, certainly didn't have this kind of ability. This was equivalent to saving Wei Wei Bai. But as soon as Wei Wei Bai returned, she wanted to kill Chi Chimu. Madame Bai's voice finally trembled. Wei Wei, tell me, were you robbed? Wei Wei Bai immediately said, no, I didn't. Mother, you have to believe me. Madame Bai saw that the guilt and fear in Wei Wei Bai's eyes became even more obvious. As expected, it had been defiled by bandits. And Chi Chimu was a witness, so Wei Wei Bai wanted to kill him as soon as she returned. Madame Bai's heart ached so much that she staggered a few steps before steadying herself. Her eyes hardened. Killing Chi Chimu and hiding this matter might have been the right thing to do. He had just thought of that. Chi Chimu, who had been keeping his head down, finally raised it with some effort. He looked at Wei Wei Bai with dark eyes. He had heard the conversation earlier, but his favorable impression of him didn't change at all. The tears in Wei Wei Bai's eyes were still falling. She was afraid that Madame Bai would not believe that she had been defiled by bandits. She had to clear Chi Chimu's name of plotting to murder her. She could only let everyone know that she was framing Chi Chimu. Wei Wei Bai felt that it wasn't easy for her. After framing Chi Chimu, she had to work hard to act like she was framing him. Madame Bai completely believed her. She said coldly, Chi Chimu actually dared to plot against you. The corner of Wei Wei Bai's mouth twitched. She had underestimated this old woman's viciousness. Sure enough, this was the woman who sent Chi Chimu to heaven with a cup of poisonous tea. For the sake of her reputation, she planned to cut the weeds and eliminate Chi Chimu by the roots. Chapter 839. Chi Chimu suddenly said softly, kill me be. Bai Nei was startled, then turned to look at him. Chi Chimu turned to look at Wei Wei Bai, the deep affection in his eyes unable to be hidden. His face revealed a sorrowful and gentle expression. Kill me Ba. I want to kill Wei Wei. I hate that she bullied me. That time in the ice water, I didn't want to save her. I wanted to kill her. No one believed this at all. Who would jump into ice water to save someone? Wasn't this an unnecessary move with one's life? Bai Nei recalled how Chi Chimu had risked his life to save Wei Wei Bai, and even her vicious heart softened. But why did he take the blame on himself? Bai Nei saw the unconcealable feelings in Chi Chimu's eyes, and her mind was struck by lightning. Could it be that Chi Chimu, towards her daughter? Chi Chimu gazed deeply at Wei Wei Bai, the infatuation in his eyes unable to be hidden. I hate her. Last night, I deliberately caused her to be taken away by bandits, so kill me Ba. I hate her was not much different from saying that I love her. Was Bai Nei so easy to fool? Yes, very easy to fool. She had stepped into Chi Chimu's trap. Then how did you appear in the bandit's lair and save her? Don't you hate Wei Wei? He clearly liked her daughter. Bai Nei believed that she couldn't have misjudged the feelings in his eyes. Chi Chimu's expression changed as expected. I was also taken away. Bai Nei sneered. Everyone knows that the bandits have been causing trouble for more than a decade and haven't kidnapped a man. Could it be that you look like a woman? Chi Chimu felt like he had been stabbed with a knife. In fact, he was also puzzled as to why that group of bandits had taken him along. Bai Nei, moreover, you said that you wanted to kill my daughter, but risked your life to save her. Your story is simply full of loopholes. Wei Wei Bai and the system had nothing to do, so they watched Drama King Chi's one-man show. Chi Chimu grew anxious. I did murder her. Believe me, kill me. Without me, she is still the innocent Wei Wei. Weren't these words just revealing 300 tales of silver here? When Wei Wei Bai heard these words, she felt that she had been defiled by a bandit and wanted to kill Chi Chimu to silence him. And because Chi Chimu loved her. That was why he would rather die to protect her chastity. What a fucking touching melodramatic drama. But this kind of deep love moved Madame Bai. This made her think of another way to protect Wei Wei Bai's innocence. It should be true that Wei Wei Bai was defiled by bandits, and because she was kidnapped by bandits, it was impossible for her to be married off. Even killing Chi Chimu wouldn't help matters. But if Wei Wei Bai was married to Chi Chimu? No, Madame Bai thought of her own child who had died tragically. Her only son, hatred welled up in her heart. It was better to kill Chi Chimu. Madame Bai was just about to order people to beat Chi Chimu to death. Wei Wei Bai suddenly hissed, "It hurts?" Madame Bai frowned. "What's the matter?" Wei Wei Bai gritted her teeth. "I hurt my foot last night?" Saying this, she couldn't help but lift her skirt. Chi Chimu immediately seized the opportunity, his expression changing greatly. "Don't let people see your knee." Wei Wei Bai paused and looked up at him in a daze. She wanted to lift her skirt to remind Madame Bai that there was still a cloth tied around her knee. In the end, Chichimu helped her shout it out. This time no one could help but look at her knee. Madame Bai felt that something was wrong. Sit down? Wei Bai immediately sat down with a stupid expression, not knowing where she had gone wrong. There were only female servants present, so there was no need to avoid arousing suspicion. As for Chichimu, he was no different from a dead man. Chapter 840. Lifting her skirt, she saw the strip of cloth on Wei Bai's knee. Madame Bai finally couldn't help clutching her chest. This strip of cloth belonged to Chichimu. In other words, besides the robber, even Chichimu had seen her daughter's body. In Madame Bai's eyes, Wei Bai immediately turned from a bright pearl to worthless junk. A daughter who had lost her chastity, her innocence. Staying in the Bai family would also ruin their reputation. But seeing Wei Bai, she couldn't strangle her to death to protect the Bai family's reputation. Madame Bai saw Wei Bai's blank expression. Then she looked at Chichimu, whose face was filled with despair. No matter how much she hated Chichimu for the sake of her daughter, he would rather die than let others know that she had lost her innocence. She felt that she could make use of him. Madame Bai couldn't suppress this thought. She said to Chichimu, "Is the strip of cloth tied to my daughter's knee yours?" Chichimu trembled and said hoarsely, "No, Wei hasn't lost her innocence. I also haven't seen her body. She is still intact." His tone was so desperate, as though he was pleading with Madame Bai to believe him and protect Wei Bai's innocence. Even a vicious person like Madame Bai was moved by the deep affection in his eyes. After all, she was a woman and was more emotional. Madame Bai knew that Chichimu was lying, but she didn't expose him. But she made another decision. You should marry Wei. This was the best method. After all, her daughter was already ruined. Marrying a man who liked her enough to die for her, could be considered a good home. No matter how much she loathed Chichimu, Madame Bai had to make plans for Wei Bai. Moreover, Chichimu knew how willful Wei Bai was and still liked her so much. She was the best marriage partner. Wei Bai was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. She immediately said angrily, "Mother, you want to marry me to this villain who wants to harm me?" Madame Bai angrily shouted, "Enough, Wei, mother is doing this for your own good." Chichimu also sadly shook his head. "No, Wei is so good. I'm not worthy." If Chichimu agreed at once, Madame Bai would be suspicious. Now all doubts were gone. Madame Bai frowned and said with a cold face, "The wedding should be simple. Prepare in the next 2 days and get married immediately. Just say that you saved Wei and Wei repaid you with her body." Chichimu immediately said, "Wei deserves better. As long as I die, no one will know that she is innocent. No, she really is innocent." Wei Bai wanted to clap her hands. Even though she had used the same strategy to save him. She wanted Madame Bai to misunderstand that she was telling lies and release Chichimu. But basically she didn't have to do anything. The dirty water that Chichimu should have splashed had almost all been splashed onto her. As expected, Madame Bai was moved. She sighed. "Forget it. After marrying my daughter, I will let go of my past grievances. Even if Chichimu died, what use was it?" Everyone knew that Wei Bai had been kidnapped by bandits. Saying this, she disregarded Wei Bai's objections and untied Chichimu's ropes. "Send young Master Biao back to rest." These words acknowledged Chichimu's status. Bai Wei had a shocked expression on her face, completely unable to understand the situation. When Chichimu was helped past her, he suddenly reached out and grabbed her sleeve. "Wei, it's all my fault. I couldn't protect you." His voice was sorrowful and affectionate, without regret. But his eyes were sinister and full of laughter, sending a chill down one's spine. Wei Bai was stunned, somewhat afraid. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.